Important update about YouTube playlists. Hey everyone. We've received many messages asking why our YouTube playlists aren't showing up. Do we create YouTube playlists? Yes, we absolutely do. So why can't you see them? Honestly, we're not sure. We've been in contact with YouTube support for several months now, but we still haven't received a clear answer or solution. After much discussion, our team has decided to take matters into our own hands. We believe the issue might be related to the number of playlists we've created on a single channel, possibly too many. Our solution? We're launching 2 additional YouTube channels, giving us a total of 3. This way, we can organize our audiobooks better and avoid the playlist visibility issue in the future. This change only affects our YouTube audience. If you're a patron supporter, you can still access all our audiobooks by visiting the collection menu on Patreon. Thanks so much for your time and continued support. Happy listening. Chapter 401, Strike. While the enemy is weakened, Kushina suddenly realized that she had no real place interfering in matters of war. She had foolishly let herself be swayed by the Nine Tails, all because of Takuya, and the potential threat of Pakura as a rival. Now that she'd found Takuya, her thoughts shifted. And what about Pakura? Don't look around. She's just in there, cleaning up. Kurama spoke up from the sealed space, sighing deeply. He almost wished he could cover his face in embarrassment. Kushina, could you be any more obvious? Aren't you supposed to have exceptional sensory abilities as a member of the Uzumaki clan? Since Tsunoda is willing to send Kushina as reinforcements, I certainly trust her abilities, as well as Tsunoda's judgment. Narashikashich's words in the command center caught Kushina's attention. We've already spread the word. As expected, Hidden Sand Village has deployed numerous teams to search for the third Kazekage. Shikashige continued. Indeed, Hidden Sand Village is putting all their effort into finding the third Kazekage. Added Kakashi Hatake, taking over the conversation. If not for this desperate search, there's no way Hidden Sand Village would have dispersed so many of their forces. The question is, what should our next move be? Do they attack directly, remain inactive, or simply let Hidden Sand Village's chaos continue to grow? Tsukumo's inclination was clear: strike now. He wanted to take advantage of Hidden Sand Village's distraction and launch an assault. Even if they couldn't completely defeat them, they could at least push them out of the Land of Fire. Currently, Hidden Sand Village's camp was positioned at a border outpost, essentially already on Fire Country soil. Narashikashige, on the other hand, believed they could afford to wait a few more days. Hidden Sand Village was still looking for the third Kazekage. The longer they searched, the more apparent it would become that he was truly gone. Before Hidden Sand Village could formally elect a new fourth Kazekage and solidify their ranks, their morale would continue to plummet. That would be the ideal time for Hidden Leaf Village to strike. The 2 senior shinobi had come straight to the command center to discuss their views with Takuya, which made their intentions obvious. We should attack, Takuya said without hesitation, aligning himself with Tsukumo's view. Although waiting could further demoralize Hidden Sand Village as news of the third Kazekage's death spreads, I believe we shouldn't delay. We need to seize the moment while Hidden Sand Village's forces are spread thin and launch a counterattack. At the very least, we must push Hidden Sand Village out of the Land of Fire, ideally, all the way back to the Land of Wind. In the resting room behind the command center, Pakura sighed, her eyes reflecting her confusion. It wasn't surprising that Takuya, not being one to play the waiting game, wanted to attack. Shikashige had anticipated this response. Shikashige spread out a pre-prepared map on the table, pointing to 2 red lines marked on it. If you both agree, then we proceed with the counterattack. Here are 2 possible routes I've mapped out. With the third Kazekage dead, Seisaori defected, and Pakura captured, Hidden Sand Village's high-level combat strength has taken a nosedive. Hidden Sand Village's greatest advantage had been the third Kazekage stationed at their camp, ready to support any front as needed. The third Kazekage, wielding magnet style and the ability to fly, had been their strategic powerhouse. No matter where an emergency arose, he could reach it in no time. But now, Hidden Sand Village had lost not only its strongest Kazekage but also their most critical support system. With Seisaori's betrayal and Pakura's capture, Hidden Leaf Village could afford to split their forces into 2 groups, each attacking from a different direction, enough to leave Hidden Sand Village stretched too thin. Without the third Kazekage, Hidden Sand Village lacks a rapid response capability. If Tsukumo attacks from one front, Lady Chio will undoubtedly lead their forces to counter him. That will leave the other side vulnerable. That's where Takuya and Kushina come in. You'll strike the exposed flank, which should throw Hidden Sand Village into disarray. Shikashige explained confidently. To be honest, a 2-pronged attack wasn't even necessary to destabilize Hidden Sand Village. Takuya hesitated briefly but kept the thought to himself. He thought it might be wise to keep a surprise up his sleeve for when Hidden Sand Village's forces began to crumble, A surprise for Shikashige, Tsukumo, and even Tsunade. Tsunade had placed such trust in him and Kushina, so Takuya was determined not to disappoint her. "I have no objections," Takuya said, spreading his hands in agreement with Shikashige's strategy. Shikashige was a veteran strategist, and having him draw up the plans meant a lot of the burden was off Takuya's shoulders. He could simply follow the course that had been set. Tsukumo grinned, also signaling his approval. "I'm in as well. It's about time Hidden Sand Village paid for their actions. But are you sure you two will be okay on your end?" Two prongs meant Tsukumo would lead one front while Takuya and Kushina led the other, with Shikashige remaining at camp to coordinate. "Tsukumo-senpai, of course we'll be fine. Have you forgotten that Takuya went through the Second Shinobi World War?" Kushina interjected before Takuya could answer. "Plus, I'll be there too. We'll make Hidden Sand Village run with their tails between their legs," Kushina declared confidently. Of course, Tsukumo and Shikashige knew Takuya's strength wasn't in question. What worried them was the chaos he might cause leading an entire squad. Seeing Kushina's confident expression, neither of them said anything further. Takuya ruffled Kushina's long red hair. "You two can rest assured. I may not be good at strategizing, but I can certainly lead men into battle. And Kushina is right, even though I'm young, I've fought my way through the Second Shinobi World War. As long as you're confident," Shikashige said, rising and gathering the map. "Just don't let Tsunade down, she's under a lot of pressure. I'll go make the necessary arrangements and choose the squads," Shikashige added before leaving. "I'll help too," Tsukumo said, following suit. There was no relying on Takuya for such logistical tasks, Shikashige had to take care of it himself. Tsukumo tagged along to help, but mostly to avoid the dog food that was inevitably going to be dished out, and to avoid what could easily turn into a love triangle at any moment. After Shikashige and Tsukumo left, Kushina looked surprised. "Huh? That's it? I heard from Tsunade that setting up a frontline attack usually requires a Jonin council meeting. For others, such a council meeting might be necessary. But Takuya, Tsukumo, and Shikashige had simply talked it out, with each contributing, and decided everything right there." Pulling Kushina into his embrace, Takuya squeezed her cheek playfully. "It's not actually that simple. It's just that Shikashige took all the work onto himself. He knows I hate dealing with details, and that I'm not good at it, so he takes care of it all. Otherwise, you'd be seeing a whole crowd gathered in the command center, arguing back and forth." Takuya had been through a few Jonin meetings himself, and each time he returned exhausted, even though he rarely gave any opinions and usually just hid in a corner watching the spectacle and dozing off. Kushina giggled at the thought of the chaotic scene, but then suddenly sat up straight, her back stiffening, as she noticed a change in Takuya's eyes. "It's the Nine Tails, isn't it?" Takuya didn't mind Kushina coming out to find him, or even to give Takuya a hard time, but what he couldn't accept was the Nine Tails manipulating her. As Takuya spoke, both he and Kushina found their consciousness entering the sealed space. TCH. Seeing Takuya arrive, the Nine Tails turned its head arrogantly to the side, as if to show it didn't care about him at all. The truth was that Kurama was feeling guilty. The fact that Takuya had come into the sealed space meant trouble. The pride of a tailed beast wouldn't allow Kurama to feel humiliated in front of Takuya, but it also didn't want to create unnecessary conflict. So Kurama put on a front of indifference, hoping Takuya would just leave. Staring at the colossal fox, Takuya slowly opened his eyes, his eternal Mangekyō Sharingan focusing sharply on Kurama's. "I never imagined the great Nine Tails, Kurama, would stoop to deceiving Kushina, even urging her to leave the village and come to the front lines." Chapter 402, putting the Nine Tails in its place. Those eyes. Those eyes. Kurama's heart skipped a beat, reminding it of the first time it had faced Madara Uchiha. It was exactly those eyes that had controlled it effortlessly, binding it with a summoning contract. The proud Nine Tails, the strongest of all tailed beasts, had been forced into a summoning contract, a complete humiliation. And it had no power to resist. What made it worse was Madara using it in his battle against Hashirama Senju. Two gods fighting while it, the mighty Nine Tails, was caught in the middle. It was pure misery. Although Takuya's Sharingan was different in design from Madara's, the trauma Kurama had suffered was deeply ingrained. Just seeing the Mangekyō Sharingan made it panic. "Kid, what do you want? Kushina was worried about you. Do you really think she was deceived by just a few words from me?" Kurama said, trying to sound confident. Kurama, afraid? Kushina found it unbelievable. The Nine Tails always seemed fearless, but here it was, clearly intimidated. Takuya remained silent, simply staring coldly at the Nine Tails. Damn it. What is this brat up to? Was he planning to teach it a lesson? Or was he just trying to issue a warning? Being stared down by the eternal Mangekyō Sharingan was truly nerve-wracking for Kurama. After all, it had been at the mercy of these eyes before, and the memory still filled it with unease. Takuya, this is all my fault. Please don't blame the big fox, okay? Kushina quickly stepped in, wrapping her arms around Takuya's and shaking them slightly, trying to calm the tension as she saw Kurama getting more and more uncomfortable. Next time, don't act on your own like this, understood? At least informed Tsunade first. Takuya finally spoke, deactivating his Sharingan and, with a sigh, led Kushina out of the sealed space. Phew, Kurama exhaled heavily as soon as Takuya left. It noticed that the sealing space had been closed off again, preventing it from seeing the outside world. Not that Kurama cared, as long as Takuya was gone. Those eyes staring directly at it had made Kurama's fur stand on end, leaving it terrified that Takuya might try to use a Genjutsu on it as well. If that happened, Kurama would truly be humiliated. For all beings, whether human or tailed beast, the prouder one was, the more they feared disgrace. Kurama was no exception. Looks like I shouldn't mess with Kushina again so carelessly. You're so bad, scaring the nine tails like that. Kushina pouted, giving Takuya's arm a light smack. Takuya laughed. I was just giving it a little warning, letting it know not to try anything. Were you really worried that I might harm that big fox? But from now on, no more sneaking off without permission, alright? Kushina's presence on the front lines clearly wouldn't have happened without Kurama's help. This was why Takuya felt the need to give Kurama a slight scare, just to keep it in check. Okay, I promise I won't do it again. Kushina lowered her head in mock defeat, pouting slightly after being scolded by Takuya. Alright, just make sure to let Tsunade know next time you want to leave the village. Since you've already come this far, it'll be easier to get permission in the future. Takuya added. It might have been reckless, but it was a pleasant surprise. Kushina had indeed chosen a good time to make her move. Hidden Leaf Village was currently dealing with conflicts on two fronts. Tsunade was holding down the fort at the village, Danzo had been stripped of his rank, and the third Hokage was still at the daimyo's residence. Given all this, her leaving the village wouldn't cause too much uproar. Once you leave once, it only gets easier the next time. Kushina nodded, a smile returning to her face, knowing that Takuya was looking out for her rather than just scolding her. By the way, about Bakura. Takuya. Ouch. Rubbing her forehead, Kushina gave Takuya a pitiful look, as if asking, why did you hit me? Takuya sighed and shook his head, chuckling, drop whatever little plan you've got cooking in your head. Bakura is with me for reasons other than romance. If that were the case, I'd be with you or Mikoto, not some woman I barely know. He then raised his voice, Bakura, you've been listening long enough, haven't you? From the resting room in the back, Bakura finally stepped out after being called out, nodding slightly toward Kushina, who eyed her with obvious hostility. Turning to Takuya, Bakura asked, are you trying to force me into making a decision now? What do you think? Takuya replied. The plan had changed, and with the counteroffensive about to start, it wasn't possible to give her unlimited time to decide. Bakura furrowed her brows, finding herself facing a difficult decision. She knew she couldn't return to Hidden Sand Village. Takuya had been trying to recruit her all along, and she was fully aware of that. But Hidden Sand Village was her home, the place she was born, grew up, and pledged her loyalty to. The thought of defecting was painful. Yet reality forced her hand. Takuya wasn't going to let her stay neutral forever. She had two choices, either swear loyalty to Hidden Leaf Village or continue to resist, holding on to her loyalty to Hidden Sand Village. The latter, however, would inevitably lead to something terrible, the outcome of which no one could predict. I'm sorry, but I can't decide right now. Bakura said, shaking her head. Her face was pale, and she let out a heavy sigh. Hidden Sand Village is my home. My entire life is there, along with my loyalty. Even if I can't return, I can't easily change my allegiance. Bakura said, her gaze towards Takuya filled with complex emotions, part frustration, part resignation. I understand your intentions, I know what you're trying to do. But until the war ends, I can't give you an answer. Takuya wasn't surprised. It would have been strange if Bakura had agreed so easily. How about this, once Hidden Sand Village has been pushed back to the Land of Wind, you'll decide. While he could empathize with her, Takuya also understood the importance of acting decisively. Some matters required a clean cut. Alright. Bakura nodded after a brief silence, accepting the condition. She knew there was no going back. If Hidden Sand Village was pushed out of the Land of Fire, it would mean they had lost this war, making her choice inevitable. Alright, go take a walk around. As long as you don't leave the camp or do anything suspicious, I won't restrict your freedom. Takuya said. And if you think you can escape, you're welcome to try. He added. With that, Takuya dismissed Bakura. He needed some quiet time with Kushina. Having an oversized third wheel around didn't bother him, but he knew Kushina wouldn't be able to relax. Kushina had been openly hostile toward Bakura, even if she hadn't said anything, Takuya could sense it. Without another word, Bakura left the command center. For her, being dismissed was somewhat of a relief. As a single woman in her 20s, the last thing she wanted to do was watch a young couple in love. Watching her leave, Kushina suddenly said, I kind of feel sorry for her. She reminds me of myself when I first came to Hidden Leaf Village. It makes sense. You both ended up having to live in a village that wasn't originally yours. You had no choice, and neither does she. Takuya replied, pulling Kushina closer, inhaling the soft scent of her hair. I thought you were going to tear into her. Takuya teased. Kushina had arrived with clear hostility, yet she hadn't said a word against Bakura. Instead, she now seemed to sympathize with her. Takuya couldn't quite figure out what went on in Kushina's mind sometimes. I wouldn't do something so embarrassing. Kushina replied, her face turning bright red as she wrapped her arms around Takuya's neck and shook her head. Chapter 403, Kushina leads the charge. The counterattack begins. Yes, I know, Kushina is the most understanding. Takuya said, chuckling. Ha ha ha. Don't laugh. Ha ha ha. Bakura wandered alone through the camp, aware that Anbu members were silently trailing her. Even without Takuya's direct order, they would monitor her. Just because Takuya gave her some freedom didn't mean Anbu would simply let her roam unchecked. She felt like a lost beast without a home, while the gazes of those around her, ranging from surprise to outright hatred, were automatically filtered out of her thoughts. With the current conflict between Hidden Leaf Village and Hidden Sand Village, her presence, still marked by the Hidden Sand Village forehead protector, inevitably drew attention in the Hidden Leaf Village camp. War breeds losses, and the Hidden Leaf Village shinobi who had lost comrades couldn't help but harbor resentment towards her, a shinobi from the enemy village. Kushina had originally come in brimming with hostility, intent on driving away her supposed rival. But after spending time with Takuya, her jealousy faded, replaced by a sense of sympathy towards Bakura, who seemed to be going through the same struggles Kushina herself had faced. Finally, the counteroffensive plan began. Orders were issued, and countless Hidden Leaf Village shinobi gathered as small squads were organized and deployed. With Kushina's arrival, Bakura anticipated some uneasy times ahead, but she was surprised. Besides the occasional affectionate exchange, Takuya and Kushina didn't do anything extreme or make her presence unbearably awkward. The anticipation of battle weighed heavily on the camp. Even before dawn, well-prepared shinobi teams were swiftly moving out, including Takuya, Kushina, and Bakura. The forces split into two groups, one led by Kakashi Hatake and the other by Takuya, both advancing toward Hidden Sand Village as encampment. However, Takuya's side was smaller, consisting of just a few hundred shinobi, while Sakamo's division was significantly larger. Nara Shikashige had hoped to divide their forces more evenly, but Takuya had refused. To him, it didn't make much difference whether he led hundreds or thousands. Besides, Sakamo's front would likely face heavier resistance, and the additional manpower would provide more room for maneuvering since Hidden Sand Village's forces outnumbered them. Kushina, don't feel pressured. This battle will be your chance to shine, a moment to prove yourself and to secure the freedom to come and go from Hidden Leaf Village as you wish. You're already strong, and with the Nine Tails aiding you, and me supporting from behind, you have nothing to fear. Takuya reassured Kushina, noticing her anxiety. Bakura, listening in, looked perplexed. She couldn't believe Takuya was actually letting Kushina take the lead in the battle against Hidden Sand Village's camp. What was even more astonishing was how simplistic their plan seemed. Kushina would charge in and wreak havoc, while Takuya and the rest would clean up afterward. It sounded utterly reckless. Is Takuya underestimating Hidden Sand Village that much? Bakura thought, feeling an urge to curse. Even if Kushina was a Jinchuriki, there was a limit to how arrogant one could be. Sarutobi Shiji, who had been specifically summoned by Shikashige, was just as dumbfounded. Takuya's battle plan left him stunned. Who fought a war like this? It was madness. He had protested, but his objections fell on deaf ears. Takuya simply dismissed his concerns, telling him to save his comments for after the battle and just follow his lead for now. Takuya had long grown tired of the old-fashioned thinking that many senior village members clung to. Sometimes, taking complete control wasn't such a bad thing, at least it meant there was no need to argue endlessly with people who couldn't see reason. Lord Takuya, we have reached the enemy's forward positions. Should we proceed further? Reported a shinobi in charge of scouting the area. No need. Let's rest here for now. Once the battle starts on the other side, we'll begin our assault. Takuya ordered. They would wait for Sakamo to initiate the attack. Once Sakamo engaged Chio and drew out the bulk of Hidden Sand Village's forces, it would be the perfect moment for their group to strike. Understood. Following Takuya's orders, the few hundred shinobi settled within the dense forest, resting and hiding. Though fighting on home soil was an unpleasant reality, the forests of the Land of Fire provided ample cover, something they wouldn't have had in the Wind Country, a land dominated by endless sand. The third Kazekage still hadn't been found, leaving Hidden Sand Village in chaos. Even Lady Chiyo was struggling to keep her composure. Fortunately, aside from sending out scouts to locate the third Kazekage and Sasori, she had also deployed a number of sentries to watch Hidden Leaf Village's camp. She was determined to prevent Hidden Leaf Village from exploiting their current turmoil. The massive mobilization from Hidden Leaf Village did not go unnoticed. It wasn't something that could be concealed, such a large movement couldn't be hidden. Hidden Leaf Village intends to strike during this chaos. I will handle Kakashi Hatake. Ebizo, stay here and assist Rasa. Keep the camp steady. The more chaotic things become, the closer Hidden Sand Village will be to defeat. Chiyo said. She was eager to face Tsukumo, her hatred for him ran deep, ever since he had killed her son and daughter-in-law. This was her chance for revenge. Don't worry, sister, I will support Rasa. Ebizo agreed, though he couldn't help adding, but sister, be careful. If Hidden Leaf Village chose this moment to attack, they must be prepared. Be wary of Takuya Yagami. I understand. It won't be easy for some kid to kill me. Chiyo responded confidently. She wasn't going to be taken down easily, even by someone who had killed the third Kazekage. Phew. Rasa exhaled deeply, his eyes bloodshot from lack of rest. Elder Ebizo, do you think Sensei is really? I don't know either, Ebizo thought to himself. Since the news spread, Rasa hadn't rested at all, and neither had Ebizo. But with his age catching up to him, even his once black beard and eyebrows were now white. Rest wasn't a luxury they could afford, not with Hidden Leaf Village about to attack. But about the battle. Before Rasa could finish, an Anbu shinobi hurriedly entered the command post. Lord Ebizo, we have detected enemy forces approaching from the southern perimeter. What? Rasa and Ebizo were both taken aback. But weren't Hidden Leaf Village's forces advancing from the north? How could they also be? Wait. This is bad. Ebizo's eyes widened in realization. If Hidden Leaf Village had a large army attacking from the north, why couldn't there be another force advancing from the south? It was clear, Hidden Leaf Village was splitting their forces. Let me handle it. Rasa interrupted, getting up. Ebizo wasn't suited for direct confrontation, his skills were in intelligence and managing the camp. Rasa needed to take charge of the southern flank himself. Chapter 404, turns out, Takuya Yagami is Hidden Leaf Village's most underestimated. The third Kazekage was dead, Sasori had defected, Bakura had been captured, and Chiyo had been drawn away by Kakashi Hatake. Hidden Sand Village was now in an embarrassing situation where there was hardly anyone capable of leading. In these circumstances, Rasa had no choice but to personally lead the force. Even Hidden Leaf Village would struggle under such conditions, no matter how many shinobi a village might have. It's tough to find people capable of leading after so many casualties or deployments. That was why the power of individuals capable of leadership mattered in a war. After the Third Shinobi War in the original timeline, Hidden Leaf Village's strength had plummeted, and they were bullied by others. Why was that? It was simply because there were few left who could take charge. Some had died, some had left in despair, others refused to fall into the vortex of politics, some defected, and some were never given the chance to rise. For all sorts of reasons, Hidden Leaf Village lost most of its strength. Sure, individual strength rarely changes the outcome of a war unless it's absolute power, but whether or not there is someone capable to lead can make all the difference to a group of shinobi. That was why Rasa himself was now heading to the battlefield. You can't leave the village. Ebizo instinctively wanted to stop him, but when he met Rasa's resolute gaze, he swallowed his words. After a long silence, Ebizo let out a bitter laugh. I understand. I will take care of things at the camp. I'll leave the battlefield to you. Rasa didn't say anything grand or heroic. He didn't think he had the right to do so. Without another word, he left the command post. This is such a mess, muttered Sarutobi Shiji, clearly exasperated. All eyes were on Takuya, but he seemed utterly unconcerned, which was a headache for Shiji. Even when Hidden Sand Village scouts approached and gathered intel, Takuya made no move to deal with them. He let them watch and deliver their findings back. What on earth is he planning? If given a choice, Shiji swore to himself he'd rather die than accept Narashikashichi's suggestion again. Following Takuya was likely to kill him, not from an enemy attack, but from sheer frustration. It had gone from an ambush to an outright, open attack. As he stared at the tiny silhouettes forming on the distant horizon, Shiji made up his mind, if he made it back, he would definitely lodge a strong complaint against Takuya. This man is impossible to rely on. To top it off, Kushina had enthusiastically agreed to take on the Hidden Sand Village forces by herself. Takuya actually wanted her, the Jinchuriki, to go solo against the enemy. How could one even describe this absurdity? The Hokage was always trying to keep the Jinchuriki safely within the village, and yet here was Takuya, sending her alone into battle. Shiji couldn't find the words to describe his feelings. Finally, they're here. I'm really curious who's leading them. Takuya remarked casually, glancing at Pakura. She kept a cold expression, remaining silent. Shiji was frustrated, and Pakura wasn't much better. This was the last thing she wanted to see. As for who was leading the hidden sand village forces, it hardly needed guessing. It had to be Raza. Chio despised Kakashi Hatake and would inevitably pursue him whenever he showed up. Besides, Sakamo had the larger force and required her presence to balance the scales. With Chiogan and Debizo handling the camp, Raza was the only remaining capable commander left, even if he was the person Chio despised the most. Suddenly, Pakura's eyelid twitched, and she turned sharply to face Takuya. Your target is Raza, isn't it? She had found Takuya's tactics too absurd to even complain about. Like Shiji, she thought he was just making things up as he went along. But now she saw the real reason. Takuya's target was Raza. To end this war that Hidden Sand Village had started, there were two paths: either defeat Hidden Sand Village decisively, breaking their will to fight and forcing them to surrender, or take out their key leadership. The third Kazekage was dead, Pakura captured, Sasori had defected, Raza was the only remaining leader in the mid-generation of Hidden Sand Village. If Takuya could capture Raza, then Chio and Debizo would have no choice but to pull back. They wouldn't risk the village's future on a gamble. They didn't have enough time to train another suitable leader. Both were getting old, and no one knew when accidents might happen. If the new leader wasn't ready when such a thing occurred, Hidden Sand Village would truly be finished. Given the choice between an uncertain victory and training for the village's future, Chio would choose Raza without hesitation. Takuya Yagami is the one person in Hidden Leaf Village who should never be underestimated. Now Pakura was also beginning to worry. The Hidden Leaf Village shinobi following Takuya were stunned. They had thought, like Pakura, that Takuya was just fooling around. But now, this was brilliant. If the opportunity arises, I won't mind taking him down, Takuya said, smiling at Pakura. The sunshine-like smile made her shiver. Even the third Kazekage couldn't stop Takuya. What chance did Raza have? Pakura had witnessed the Kazekage's death with her own eyes. She knew there was no way Raza could match Takuya. I'll give you a chance. If you pledge loyalty to us, I'll spare Raza and protect Hidden Sand Village's future. Are you a devil? Pakura's pupils shrank. As she watched the approaching enemy force, Takuya continued, I know someone like you would never easily defect, even if the war ends. So I'll help make the choice for you. Lucky for us, it's Raza. As the enemies drew nearer, Takuya's smile widened, while Pakura felt her heart sink. Kushina, it's up to you now. Got it. Although nervous, Kushina wouldn't allow herself to back down. She knew that defeating Hidden Sand Village meant not only helping Tsunade, but also herself. Hidden Leaf Village had to win this war, and win it decisively. Takuya, I'm going in. Kushina didn't look back as she charged toward the enemy. Worried, Shiji asked, Lord Takuya, shouldn't we provide some assistance? Chapter 405, The Jinchuriki. Facing the Nine-Tails Jinchuriki, I think you might have misunderstood Kushina's strength. The second strongest in Hidden Leaf Village, and you think she needs assistance? Takuya stood there, arms crossed, speaking calmly. Save your worries. I'm not the Hokage, I won't keep Kushina hidden in the village. Then who's first? Sarutobi Shiji was a bit taken aback. Kushina, the second strongest in Hidden Leaf Village? What did that mean for the Sannin and Kakashi Hatake? And who held the top spot? Great Fox, please help me. On the outside, Kushina appeared determined, but inside, she was panicking. She was already seeking help, or rather, begging the Nine-Tails for support. In the sealed space, the Nine-Tails groaned, raising one paw to cover its face. After trying to hold it in, it finally couldn't, and it roared out, that brat Takuya Yagami is right, you're so unreliable. Damn it. After everything I've taught you, have you forgotten it all? Are you scared of just this many enemies? Use my chakra. Cloak yourself in the tailed beast's power and crush them completely. As an Uzumaki, Kushina possessed all the advantages of her clan, massive chakra reserves, strong sensory skills, and mastery over powerful sealing techniques. With the Nine-Tails, if no Kage-level opponent showed up, no matter how many enemies there were, Kushina could handle them all if she cloaked herself in the tailed beast's chakra. Once enveloped in the tailed beast cloak, Kushina's strength would rise dramatically. Not to mention, the Nine-Tails chakra could restore her stamina and heal her wounds. Kushina didn't need to do anything fancy, she just needed to charge straight ahead. As for entering the Nine-Tails chakra mode, well, frankly, against this caliber of enemies, it wasn't necessary. This was complete overkill. Alright, here I go then. After receiving a scolding from the Nine-Tails, Kushina actually calmed down. A dark red chakra shrouded her body, and one tail after another emerged behind her. Covered entirely in the tailed beast's chakra, Kushina looked like a humanoid fox, walking upright in an ominous dark red form. Though she lacked much combat experience, her power was overwhelming against the forces led by Raza. The sheer chakra capacity combined with the presence of the nine tails made her unstoppable. Otherwise, Takuya would never have let her take such a risk. Lord Raza, only one enemy is charging at us. Damn it. Raza was nearly apoplectic with rage. How much did Hidden Leaf Village look down on them? The entire force remained idle, sending just one person, no, sending a woman. In the world of shinobi, strong female ninja were not uncommon. For example, Bakura, whom Raza disliked greatly, was one such powerful kunoichi. Still, strong female ninjas were rare when compared to the overall shinobi population. Seeing Kushina charging alone made Raza believe Hidden Leaf Village was underestimating him, underestimating Hidden Sand Village. This is bad. As Kushina got closer, her body began emanating dark red chakra that covered her completely, with multiple tails extending from her back. Seeing this scene, Raza's eyes widened. It's a Jinchuriki. The nine tails Jinchuriki from Hidden Leaf Village. Had Hidden Leaf Village lost its mind? They actually deployed their Jinchuriki to the battlefield. Wasn't it Hidden Leaf Village's policy to keep their Jinchuriki hidden away at all costs? Once he identified Kushina, Raza was stunned. All of the 5 great shinobi villages had tailed beasts, but they rarely sent their Jinchuriki to the front lines to fight. Among the 5 great nations, it was only Hidden Stones Village and Hidden Clouds Village that would send their Jinchuriki on regular missions, and even then, not directly into war. Hidden Mist Village had set a precedent by deploying their Jinchuriki to the front lines and even releasing the tailed beast, creating havoc and causing significant damage to Orochimaru. But that was a drastic step, something Hidden Sand Village was wary of attempting. Who could have guessed that Hidden Leaf Village would do the same? Wait. Suddenly, Raza thought of Hidden Mist Village and realized something. His face changed dramatically as he yelled, "Everyone spread out. Do not approach the Nine Tails Jinchuriki." If Hidden Mist Village could pull off such a stunt, who could guarantee Hidden Leaf Village wouldn't try the same thing if pushed to the limit? Normally, Hidden Leaf Village wouldn't resort to this tactic, but there was always a risk. Hidden Leaf Village wouldn't usually send their Jinchuriki into battle, yet here Kushina was. What if Hidden Leaf Village wanted to end the war quickly by sacrificing her? His just picturing the Nine Tails going berserk, chasing down Hidden Sand Village shinobi, Raza shuddered. So cunning, so very cunning. No wonder they only sent in the Jinchuriki while the rest stayed back. Raza suspected that part of the seal had already been undone on the Nine Tails Jinchuriki, and as soon as she reached their lines, the seal would fully break, giving the Nine Tails control. What was happening? Raza's sudden shout had left the Hidden Sand Village shinobi confused, but even if they didn't understand, they followed orders. They spread out, avoiding clustering in a single area. Go, Kushina. With the pride of an Uzumaki, break their defenses. The Nine Tails roared in excitement. Finally, it was time for some real fighting, something it hadn't experienced in far too long. The Nine Tails had always been a being that thrived on chaos. It had been locked away inside Mito Uzumaki for decades, practically suffocating from boredom. Then along came Kushina, who, unlike Mito, was willing to live in harmony with it. Now, it had a chance to fight again, even if it was merely supporting her from the sidelines. This was enough to get the Nine Tails riled up, roaring in the sealed space. Let's move forward too, Takuya said, watching Kushina advance toward the enemy lines. Only then did he lead the rest of the forces at a leisurely pace. Boom. 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 As the distance between both sides closed, the ground trembled. A golden wave of sand surged toward Kushina. Although Raza had never directly fought a tailed beast or a Jinchuriki, he had witnessed the third Kazekage subdue the one tail using magnet style. Even without such experiences, most magnet-style battles followed a similar pattern, starting with a wave of sand. But Hidden Sand Village's successive magnet-style users were declining in skill. The third Kazekage could at least pull off a few impressive feats, while by Raza's time, the moves had become rather basic. And by the time of Gaara, things were even more pitiful. He couldn't even create a proper sand wave. Boom. 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 Golden sand formed a tidal wave that rushed toward Kushina. Pouting slightly, she shouted defiantly, "Stop underestimating me." Wearing her tailed beast cloak, Kushina's combat style turned fierce. As the wave of gold sand surged toward her, she didn't dodge or retreat. Instead, her hands, shaped like claws, met the attack head-on. Yes, that's the way. Tear apart that annoying sand. The Nine Tails laughed heartily. It was clear that Kushina's battle style was exactly to its liking. Chapter 406, Kushina battles the Hidden Sand Village army alone. A large group of sand shinobi retreated quickly, keeping their eyes fixed on the battlefield, ready to jump in at any moment. At the same time, they were also on guard against the approaching Hidden Leaf Village shinobi forces. Crush her. The golden sand enveloped Kushina as Raza raised his hand and clenched his fist. His plan was to compress her until she was crushed into pulp. With all that gold sand, just the weight alone would be enough to crush most shinobi into a pulp, let alone the compressing pressure of the chakra-infused golden sand. If Kushina didn't have a way to break out, she would be turned into nothing more than a bloody smear. Lord Takuya. Sarutobi Shiji was on edge, feeling his anxiety spike. Kushina was already engulfed by the sand, and if no action was taken soon, the consequences could be dire. If I'm not worried, I don't see why you should be. Takuya watched him, baffled. Could he not just have a little patience and wait to see what would happen? Raza's face suddenly changed dramatically. How is this possible? With a loud shout, the golden sand that had been compressing Kushina exploded, and a blinding beam of energy shot straight toward Raza. The unexpected attack forced Raza to abandon his compressing technique, using all his chakra to form a shield out of golden sand to protect himself. Boom. The beam collided with the shield, causing a massive explosion, scattering the gold sand across the sky like a golden rain falling to the earth. As the light faded, Kushina emerged, still cloaked in her nine tails chakra. Her goal was crystal clear, Raza, the one using magnet style against her. The magnet style was indeed powerful, but Raza had yet to reach his peak. Even at his peak, his abilities weren't extraordinary, otherwise, he wouldn't have been taken down so easily by Orochimaru. The truth was, Raza wasn't as powerful as many believed, and currently, he wasn't even at his strongest. Naturally, he was no match for Kushina. Protect Lord Raza. The explosion enveloped Raza, and the surrounding sand shinobi panicked, rushing toward Kushina to block her advance. They couldn't allow her to get to Raza. Get out of my way. Wasn't this supposed to be a one-on-one fight? How come they were all jumping in to assist now? This was so dishonorable. Kushina, clearly irritated, extended several golden chains from her body, which shot toward the enemy shinobi. Ah! With a chorus of screams, a number of sand shinobi were impaled on the chains, looking like a gruesome string of skewered snacks. Typically, sealing techniques weren't offensive, but Kushina's adamantine chains were an exception. They were not only immensely strong for sealing purposes, but also incredibly lethal, capable of binding even the nine tails. Taking down regular shinobi was no issue for her chains, as demonstrated by the macabre display. Seeing Kushina's overwhelming power, the Hidden Leaf Village shinobi began to understand why Takuya had allowed her to fight alone. Her power was excessive, enough to rival that of any shinobi army. Is this a Uzumaki clan technique? It looks incredibly strong. Upon seeing the adamantine chains in action, several of the Hidden Leaf Village shinobi unconsciously touched their own chests, imagining what it would be like to be pierced through by those enormous golden chains. It must be excruciating. Cough, cough. Amidst the battlefield, a coughing sound echoed. Raza, his clothes disheveled, managed to stand up, visibly shaken as he looked at Kushina. Just a bit closer, and he would have been finished. Was that a tailed beast bomb just now? Damn it. Since when was Hidden Leaf Village's Jinchuriki this powerful? Wait, something's not right. Sensing an overwhelming sense of danger, Raza's eyes widened. With no time to think, he manipulated his gold sand into a thick wall before him. Boom. A second later, Kushina's fist slammed into the golden wall, which cracked and shattered upon impact. Although the wall absorbed some of the power, her fist still managed to strike Raza, sending him flying like a cannonball. Seeing this, Takuya couldn't help but grimace. It reminded him of the sparring sessions with Kushina, those sudden, ferocious punches. Her raw power was monstrous, and combined with her incredible physical strength, her punches were no joke. It wouldn't be surprising if Kushina could rival Tsunade in sheer strength. While they hadn't tested this, Takuya believed that in a battle, the only edge Tsunade might have over Kushina would be experience. Even with her seal unleashed, Tsunade might struggle, especially since Kushina had a certain nine-tailed fox on her side. After punching Raza, Kushina could sense that several of his bones had broken. Looking at her own small fist, she murmured, I thought he would be tougher. Damn it. Protect Lord Raza. Seeing Raza sent flying, the sand shinobi grew even more desperate, charging toward Kushina, despite the fear that her chains would impale them. At this moment, they were willing to die if it meant protecting Raza. They could die, but Raza must survive. Kunai were thrown at her, many of them with explosive tags attached, while other shinobi began launching ninjutsu toward her. Yet, none of it could affect Kushina. Covered in the nine tails chakra, her speed was simply too fast. Moving like a blur through the battlefield, her attacks were brutal, leaving broken bones, deep claw marks, and fallen enemies in her wake. With the nine tails chakra shrouding her, Kushina's hands had turned into something akin to sharp beast claws, and a swipe from her could leave deep cuts. Unfortunately for the enemy, despite her lack of experience and softer personality, many of the sand shinobi ended up with severe injuries rather than fatal wounds. Had Takuya been in her place, there would be nothing but corpses and blood all over. Facing weaker but numerous foes, Takuya wouldn't bother stabbing through the enemy's heart. Slitting their throats would be much faster and more efficient. Lord Takuya, should we step in and assist? The Hidden Leaf village forces had come to a stop once again. Chapter 407, On the Battlefield, I'm in charge under Takuya's command. The Hidden Leaf village forces halted, watching from afar as Kushina fought on her own. She moved effortlessly through the enemy's ranks, hunting down the injured Raza. Poor Raza had broken several ribs and was clutching his chest, desperately evading her pursuit, looking exceptionally pitiful. No need, Takuya said, smiling slightly. Kushina lacks combat experience. Having great power isn't enough. Sooner or later, she will face more enemies. It's good for her to gain more fighting experience. He continued, noting the exasperated looks from Sarutobi Shiji and the others. Alright, stop giving me those looks, Takuya added, shrugging innocently. You all underestimate Kushina and overestimate these enemies. Don't forget who Kushina is. It's not just Raza and a few hundred hidden sand village ninjas. Even if the third Kazekage came back to life, he wouldn't necessarily be able to deal with her. Takuya wasn't exaggerating. Kushina had the strength to back his words. Even if the third Kazekage outclassed her in combat experience, it wouldn't matter. She had the nine tails at her disposal. Once she unleashed that power, it wouldn't matter if it was the Kazekage, she could just overpower him. Instead of worrying about Kushina's safety, they should consider how high a price the enemy would need to pay to push her to the point of using the nine tails mode. Compared to the third Raikage fighting off 10,000 hidden stones village soldiers, Kushina's opponents were a minor skirmish. Giving her some assistance wouldn't be a bad idea, though. Sarutobi Shiji hesitated before continuing, trying to convince Takuya to stop fooling around and act seriously. You're right. Some help is indeed in order. Takuya nodded, seemingly in agreement, before slapping his forehead as if he had suddenly remembered something. Just as Sarutobi Shiji thought he had succeeded, Takuya turned and said, I forgot. My pet hasn't eaten in a while. Before everyone's stunned eyes, Takuya summoned Manda. Pointing at the battlefield, he commanded, Manda, go help Kushina. That girl is too soft-hearted, she's made a lot of noise, but hasn't killed many enemies. You can clean up after her, and don't be shy about eating your fill. The battlefield was filled with free self-service meals in the form of enemy corpses. Takuya wasn't going to bother dealing with them, nor would he leave them for the enemy to recover. He might as well let Manda benefit from it. After all, following Takuya hadn't been easy for the giant snake, no offerings, no comforts. Letting Manda feast now seemed like a fair deal. When it came to enemies, Takuya had no mercy. The saying went, the only good enemy is a dead enemy. An enemy without even a body left behind? Even better. Hiss. Manda hissed in excitement, its massive body lunging toward the battlefield. Ever since it started following Takuya, Manda had been living poorly compared to its time with Orochimaru. Orochimaru would provide offerings, whereas Takuya only used it as a tool. Demanding offerings from Takuya? That was asking to get its head smashed in. Manda was resentful but powerless, forced to endure, and it seized every opportunity for an extra meal. Watching Manda charge in, many shinobi gasped, how powerful. Sarutobi Shiji rolled his eyes. Was this worth being shocked about? Manda had once been Orochimaru's summon, and only later followed Takuya. While Manda might appear submissive around Takuya, in truth, it was strong. It might not be able to kill Jonin as easily as chickens, but it was certainly formidable enough that ordinary Jonin couldn't deal with it without a considerable numerical advantage. Yet, despite its strength, Manda was just a tool in Takuya's eyes. If Snowy hadn't been in deep sleep, Manda wouldn't have had a role to play. Manda's behavior also starkly contrasted with its past. It acted like a puppy around Takuya, whereas it had always demanded offerings from Orochimaru, threatening to eat him if not satisfied. Block it. It's Manda. Takuya Yagami's summon. You, go protect Lord Raza. Everyone else, with me, stop Manda. Under Kushina's relentless assault, Raza could barely protect himself. Seeing the chaos, several hidden sand village jonin stepped up to direct their forces. Without proper coordination, they would only give the enemy more openings. This is getting bad. A hidden sand village shinobi muttered. With just Kushina, they were already struggling. Now with the addition of a giant snake, things looked bleak. On top of that, Hidden Leaf Village's main forces were still observing from afar. The Hidden Sand Village ninjas were growing increasingly desperate, and could only think of ways to support each other while sending up signal flares, hoping for reinforcements from their camp. It was a miserable sight. Any hidden sand village ninja who got too close to Kushina shared the same fate, sent flying as quickly as they'd approached. The unlucky ones were struck dead on the spot, either from a slap, a punch, or a vicious claw swipe that left them torn apart. It seems Kushina still lacks combat experience, Takuya noted. Though he, Nawaki, and Minato had sparred with her frequently, real battles were different. Because of her temperament, Kushina was holding back. Most of the enemies she fought ended up wounded but not dead. Lord Takuya, shouldn't we? Sarutobi Shiji hesitated. He wanted to say that if they charged in now, they could make the enemy flee. But he also knew that Takuya wouldn't necessarily agree. Takuya seemed intent on giving Kushina the chance to improve her combat skills. No rush. Takuya shook his head, dismissing Shiji's request. Just enjoy the show. Why the hurry? Kushina was tearing through the hidden sand village forces like a lion through sheep, regardless of their numbers. Once you reached a certain power level, sheer numbers became irrelevant. Even if hidden sand village had thousands of shinobi, it wouldn't change the outcome. Kushina wasn't like the third Raikage, who could be worn down to death. If she got tired, the Nine Tails would just take over, and then things would really get ugly for the enemy. One-tailed beast bum and their will to fight would vanish instantly. One Kushina was bad enough, add Manda, and it was almost overkill. Unlike Kushina, Manda was ruthless, it killed, then devoured. The sight of Manda devouring enemies alive had a far greater psychological impact than Kushina's overwhelming power. But if Kushina gets hurt, the Nine Tails might go berserk. Sarutobi Shiji argued anxiously. Takuya shot him a cold look, his tone stern. I said no rush. If you're not happy, you can leave. I won't accuse you of desertion, and you can even complain about me later. But right now, I'm in charge. Thanks to the third Hokage, the Sarutobi clan had always enjoyed a certain level of privilege in Hidden Leaf Village. But with Takuya, such privileges didn't apply. You either followed his orders, or you left. How can this be? Raza muttered, starting to doubt everything. He couldn't even handle a single Jinchuriki. The worst part was Kushina's lack of battle experience. She wasn't using tactics, she was just charging at him with brute force, and he still couldn't keep up. Magnet Style, a famed ability in the ninja world, seemed ineffective against her. With her Nine Tails cloak, Kushina's destructive power was too much, his gold sand couldn't hold up against her sheer force. Chapter 408, Kushina retreats, Nine Tails takes over vast chakra reserves, unmatched vitality, the additional chakra from the Nine Tails, plus the Senju clan's monstrous strength technique, all these factors combined had turned Kushina into an unstoppable force on the battlefield. The flare that had been fired for assistance had already been spotted by Hidden Sand Village's forces, and the news had promptly reached Ebizo. Upon hearing it, Ebizo's face darkened. You three, guard the camp. I'll lead reinforcements to save Raza. I hope we aren't too late. The third Kazekage was gone, Chio was preoccupied by Kakashi Hatake and unable to leave, Sasori had defected, and Pakura had been captured. If Raza were to be killed or captured now, Hidden Sand Village would be thrown into chaos. Ebizo felt a cold sweat drip down his back as he considered what a state of disarray Hidden Sand Village would fall into. There would be no suitable candidate for the position of Kazekage, leaving a dangerous power vacuum. The others could be lost, but not Raza. He was too important for the village's future. I hope we're not too late. Ebizo thought, taking a team of shinobi with him, his heart full of unease. Raza needed to hold on until they could arrive. What had started as a controlled battle for Hidden Sand Village had turned into an uncontrollable mess after the capture of Pakura, the death of the third Kazekage, and Sasori's defection. Their plans had completely unraveled, and Ebizo had no choice but to try and protect their last hope. On the other side of the battlefield, Kakashi Hatake and Chio were locked in a heated battle. Though Chio wasn't quite Tsukumo's match, she was fighting with the support of Hidden Sand Village's renowned puppet brigade. Tsukumo couldn't afford to be reckless. He wasn't about to end up like Danzō during the Second Shinobi War. Back then, Danzō had overestimated himself and gotten cornered, ultimately losing an arm and an eye. Hidden Leaf Village's individual strength might surpass Hidden Sand Village's, but Hidden Sand Village had more shinobi overall. This had led to a deadlock, with both sides constantly fighting for every bit of advantageous terrain, never giving an inch. That old woman Chio is really tough. Tsukumo cursed, shoving back the puppet brigade again. He looked at the wound on his arm, grimacing as he swallowed an antidote. Even though he was the worst possible opponent for a puppet master, the sheer number of puppets made it challenging, and all their weapons were poisoned. Thankfully, Chio hadn't developed a new type of poison recently, or Hidden Leaf Village's casualties would have been even worse. Meanwhile, back on Takuya's battlefield, Raza was growing increasingly desperate. Magnet Style, raging waves. Since he couldn't outright defeat Kushina, he aimed to wear her down instead, both her chakra and her stamina. He doubted that Kushina's chakra reserves were limitless, Jinchuriki or not. How much chakra could she possibly draw from the nine tails? Boom. Golden sand waves surged towards Kushina, continuously disrupting her attacks, making her stomp her feet in frustration. Despite having overwhelming strength, her lack of battle experience was showing. In the sealed space within her, the nine tails was laughing so hard it almost hurt. Kushina had the strength to crush Raza, but because she lacked experience, she ended up being repeatedly repelled once Raza changed his strategy. The nine tails found this endlessly amusing. Damn fox. Why are you laughing? Help me. Kushina shouted in annoyance. These waves of golden sand were driving her crazy. Do you really want my help? The nine tails was genuinely surprised. It had expected Kushina to go into nine tails chakra mode, but instead, she chose to ask for its assistance directly. Just do it. I'm getting tired. High-intensity battles drained one's mental energy quickly. It was Kushina's first major battle, and after a while, she began to feel exhausted. Since you're so sincerely begging me, fine. I'll graciously grant your request. The nine tails said smugly, folding its arms. Can you not imitate Takuya's tone? Kushina retorted, feeling a headache coming on. It was just a big fox, why was it mimicking people? Kushina's relentless attacks were starting to falter. The waves of golden sand Raza was manipulating were taking their toll on her, and she was no longer able to push forward. What a pity. Takuya murmured to himself. Magnet style had potential, but the users in Hidden Sand Village always seem to have limited chakra reserves. If a member of the Uzumaki clan wielded magnet style, the sight of endless waves of sand covering the battlefield would have been incredible. Ice style was another underutilized power. With a massive chakra pool, freezing the entire landscape would have been nothing short of awe-inspiring. Takuya sighed, recalling the third Mizukage's supposed ice style, which looked more like someone playing with snowflakes and ice cubes. Seeing Kushina panting and pausing in her pursuit of Raza, Takuya knew she was exhausted. It wasn't that her physical stamina had given out or her chakra was depleted, it was mental fatigue. After all, it was her first proper battle, one where she was thrown directly into a confrontation, surrounded by hundreds of enemies, trying to harness her full power. Mentally, this kind of stress was bound to be draining. How will this end? Kushina had reached her limit, which meant the nine tails would be taking over. And if the nine tails took over, the battle was as good as over. Hidden Leaf Village's shinobi perked up at Takuya's words, bracing themselves. Roar. Under everyone's watchful eyes, Kushina, who had paused her attacks, suddenly changed. The dark red chakra cloak she had been using vanished, replaced by a gigantic golden nine tails enveloping her. Kushina wasn't Naruto, and she hadn't yet perfected her bond with the nine tails. But with control now handed over to the nine tails, it decided to fight in the style it preferred most. A colossal golden nine tails appeared on the battlefield, whipping up fierce winds that swept across the area. The ground beneath it cracked and shattered from the sheer force, forming a massive crater as terrifying chakra surged upward. Every shinobi on the battlefield was stunned. Even Manda, the massive snake, seemed to remember something. It shivered, and in the blink of an eye, it undid the summoning jutsu, slithering back to Ruchi Cave as fast as possible. It had no interest in sticking around to be collateral damage. What? What kind of monster is this? Raza's expression went blank as he stared at the golden fox. If given a choice, he would rather continue being chased all over the battlefield by Kushina in her chakra cloak than face this golden beast. A tailed beast rampage. No, this wasn't exactly that. A monster. Many Hidden Sand Village shinobi were so terrified that they collapsed where they stood, staring wide-eyed at the nine tails, whose tails whipped around like gigantic pillars. It wasn't just the enemy that was terrified, even Hidden Leaf Village's shinobi were taken aback. They had just been preparing for battle, but now they were dumbfounded, instinctively looking back at Takuya, wanting to ask, "Sir, are we still going to charge in? What in the world was this? Could a Jinchuriki do something like that?" Bakura and Sarutobi Shiji were equally stunned, their eyes wide open. "Wait it out. Wait until everything settles before advancing," Takuya said. The nine tails had taken over the battle, so charging in now would be suicidal, better to wait for it all to end. Chapter 409, The Nine Tails plays ruthlessly with Raza. Since Kushina entrusted the nine tails with the fight, it was time to let it vent its pent-up frustration. Having been sealed for so long, the giant fox was clearly eager to unleash its rage. Its dramatic entrance left no doubt, the nine tails was ready to make the enemy pay. "Lord Takuya, why is the Jinchuriki?" Sarutobi Shiji asked, bewildered. "This is one of the abilities of a Jinchuriki. Takuya replied casually. Being a Jinchuriki doesn't just mean using the tailed beast's chakra. If you gain the beast's trust and become a perfect Jinchuriki, you can wield a nearly invincible power. Does this mean Kushina has gained the Nine Tails' approval? Shige asked, his tone colored with astonishment. As a member of the Sarutobi clan, he understood very well the implications of the Nine Tails recognizing Kushina. It meant that the Jinchuriki would become uncontrollable. With a wry smile, Takuya shrugged. Not completely, but she's close. I think it will only take a few more years for her to become a perfect Jinchuriki. The Nine Tails still has some lingering grievances. The Nine Tails grinned, raising one massive paw as its gaze locked onto Raza. It mocked, pathetic insect, how would you like to die? I can fulfill that wish. This wasn't Kushina's voice, it was the Nine Tails speaking directly. Raza's situation had just gone from bad to worse. Though he wasn't sure how Kushina had transformed like this, Raza understood that he was in serious trouble, and by extension, so was Hidden Sand Village. Stubborn fool. Raza shouted, controlling a wave of golden sand to attack the Nine Tails. With a sneer, the Nine Tails easily swiped through the sand, destroying the onslaught without any effort. Two of its long tails shot forward like spears, piercing through the golden sand and slamming into the ground, shaking it violently. Many Hidden Sand Village shinobi fell to the ground in terror, entirely losing their will to fight. Raza barely avoided being skewered. He was quick, but the Nine Tails didn't mind. It was playing with him. To the Nine Tails, Raza was just a slightly tougher ant, something to toy with until it got bored. Nine Tails, leave him alive. Takuya ordered. Play if you want, but don't kill him. Raza might have been ambitious, but keeping him alive was more beneficial to Hidden Leaf Village than killing him outright. Takuya doubted Gyo would dare continue fighting if Raza was captured. If Raza died, Hidden Sand Village would face a dire shortage of capable leaders. Understood. The Nine Tails roared in annoyance. Though it didn't like being restricted, it wouldn't defy Takuya. Instead, it vented its frustration on the surrounding Hidden Sand Village shinobi. Its Nine Tails lashed out, striking those nearby, sending bodies flying and breaking bones. The Nine Tails' spiteful nature was evident as its long tail swung through the battlefield, exacting its displeasure. Takuya remained unfazed. As long as the Nine Tails didn't kill Raza, it could do as it pleased. He knew how to deal with the Nine Tails' rebellious streak. Once Hakuryu awoke, it would have plenty of time to play with the Nine Tails in the ceiling space. Hakuryu was excellent at putting the Nine Tails in its place. What is that? Ebizo, leading a group of reinforcements, stared in disbelief at the massive golden Nine Tails in the distance. The towering beast looked like a living mountain, and at its feet was Raza, being mercilessly toyed with. Ebizo couldn't believe his eyes. Wasn't Hidden Sand Village at war with Hidden Leaf Village? How had this gigantic fox come into play? It looked an awful lot like the Nine Tails that was supposed to be sealed in Hidden Leaf Village. Raza, meanwhile, was in a pitiful state, being completely dominated by the Nine Tails. His clothes were tattered, and several of his bones were broken. The slightest touch from the Nine Tails brought excruciating pain. Nine Tails! Raza screamed in fury and humiliation. Despite his injuries and depleted chakra, the fox refused to kill him. This mockery was perhaps the most painful wound of all. Noisy. The Nine Tails yawned in boredom. After playing with Raza for a while, it had lost interest. Raza was simply too weak to be worth its effort. Remembering Takuya's warning, the Nine Tails didn't kill him. Instead, it used its tail to swat Raza aside, rendering him unconscious. Not good. Ebizo cried out, seeing Raza fall. His heart nearly leaped out of his chest. Forgetting the danger, he led his men toward the battlefield, desperate to reach Raza. The Nine Tails, having already noticed Ebizo and his reinforcements approaching, gave a derisive look in their direction. With a twisted grin, it began gathering chakra, forming a tail beast bomb. Since it couldn't kill Raza, it would vent its anger on the others. In this battle, Hidden Sand Village would undoubtedly suffer immense losses. Facing the Nine Tails was a nightmare, far worse than when Hidden Leaf Village encountered the Three Tails and Six Tails on the coastal battlefield. During that battle, Jiraiya and Orochimaru had managed to hold off the tailed beasts, but even so, Hidden Leaf Village had suffered significant casualties. The Nine Tails, however, was an entirely different beast. And this time, there was no one capable of restraining it. For a tailed beast bomb was a standard attack, something as common as any shinobi's jutsu. Of the 9 tailed beasts, all but Shukaku and Matetabi frequently use tailed beast bombs as their go-to technique. The Nine Tails, with a manic gleam in its eyes, opted for a close-range blast, swallowing the tailed beast bomb and firing a devastating energy beam from its mouth, sweeping it across the Hidden Sand Village reinforcements rushing toward the battlefield. Boom! The ground shook violently, debris flying in all directions as explosions erupted across the impact zone. Many hidden sand village shinobi never had a chance to react, reduced to nothing more than lifeless bodies in mere seconds. For the Ninetales, wiping out hundreds of ninja was a simple task. If it wanted to, it could even amass a massive tailed beast bomb, decimating an entire village like Hidden Leaf Village in just a few blasts, turning it into a wasteland. Such was the terrifying might of a tailed beast bomb. Of course, the power of the attack depended on the strength of the tailed beast. In that regard, the Ninetales was unmatched, except perhaps by the Eight-Tails. Still, even the Eight-Tails would struggle to withstand the Ninetales' raw power. The Ten-Tails, of course, was on another level entirely, with tailed beast bombs that could bring about true cataclysms. The sheer difference in power was staggering. And now, with the battlefield in chaos and the hidden sand village forces decimated, Ebizo could only stare at the destruction, horror and disbelief etched on his face. It was over, nothing was left. Chapter 410, The stronger our power, the better. A vast section of the forest vanished, leaving the ground flat and bare, wiped clean by the power of the tailed beast bomb. The explosion's sheer might obliterated everything, even preventing the enemy from leaving behind so much as a corpse. Just like the trees and soil, everything had been erased. A few lucky survivors stood in a daze, like puppets whose strings had been cut, staring blankly at the scene before them. Why are we even here on this battlefield? Can we even make a difference in this kind of fight? The Hidden Leaf Village shinobi were just as stunned as the enemies, staring in disbelief at what had unfolded. Their initial reaction wasn't joy or cheering, it was terror and awe. Did I really cause this? Kushina murmured, lost in thought as she looked at the forest, now flattened. The Ninetales yawned back in the sealed space, clearly unbothered. This is nothing special. If you'd seen the Battle of the Valley of the End. The great beast abruptly cut itself off, its face falling as it quieted down. Though it had been controlled back then, it still retained those terrible memories. The sheer scale of the destruction brought about by Hashirama Senju and Madara Uchiha dwarfed anything the Ninetales could do by itself. Even now, it seemed this kid, Takeya, was approaching that same level of power. The thought unsettled the Ninetales. For just a moment, a bizarre idea flashed through its mind, maybe being sealed wasn't so bad after all. At least no one would come after it, not someone like Takeya. With Takeya's strength, controlling the Ninetales wouldn't be hard. If Madara had managed it, Takeya certainly could too. The difference was that being sealed inside Kushina kept Takeya from trying. Besides, the boy already had his own tailed beast, why would he need the Ninetales? It wasn't as beautiful or as powerful as Snowy. Snowy's slumber was probably nearing its end. As Snowy's master, Takeya could feel subtle changes, its chakra was becoming more active. It was a clear sign that the sleep was coming to an end. Ignoring the dazed Hidden Leaf Village shinobi, Takeya walked over and wrapped Kushina in a hug. "Don't let it bother you," he said softly. "This is war. You did nothing wrong, and neither did the Ninetales. If we hadn't eliminated the enemy, it would have been our comrades, our village, lying dead." Though Kushina was kind-hearted, she wasn't someone who would go easy on an enemy. This was just her first experience with this kind of devastation, and it had shaken her. She just needed a little time. "I'm fine." Kushina smiled, resting her head on Takeya's shoulder. "I was just scared, I never realized the fox could be that powerful." Takeya chuckled, releasing her and giving her nose a playful tweak. "Once you become a perfect Jinchuriki, you'll be even scarier. This is just child's play. Only as a perfect Jinchuriki can you fully harness the true power of both the beast and its host. Let's go home. This war should be ending soon. I believe Hidden Sand Village will make the wise choice. The best outcome from this battle was to force Hidden Sand Village to surrender. If not, they'd drive them back into the Wind Country. They'd lost nearly 1,000 shinobi in this battle, and their village's future pillar, Raza, had been captured. Takeya was confident that Chio and Ebizo would make the sensible choice. After all, Chio wasn't a fool. As for Ebizo, he had been lucky enough to escape. Had he been any slower, he would have been caught in the tailed beast bomb's blast like everyone else. "Yeah," Kushina said, feeling a sense of pride. Finally, she could be of help to Takeya. Her earlier unease began to fade, replaced by a bubbly excitement. She skipped alongside him, her earlier fears washed away. Even as they made their way back, the Hidden Leaf Village shinobi continued to cast fearful glances at Kushina. It didn't go unnoticed. Takeya tossed Raza, tied up, over to Sarutobi Shiji, before sweeping his gaze across the group. "I know you are afraid. I understand your fear. But please, get your emotions under control. Ninetales may be terrifying, but it is also Hidden Leaf Village's strength. And Kushina, as its Jinchuriki, is our strength. The stronger she is, the safer you are. The stronger she becomes, the stronger Hidden Leaf Village becomes. He let his voice rise, commanding their attention. If you can't even understand something as simple as that, then I suggest you write up a resignation when you get home, have your memories sealed, and live as an ordinary villager. Because if you fear your comrades more than your enemies, you have no business being a shinobi. Takaya didn't want Kushina's incredible power to end up alienating her. Fear was natural when faced with the unknown, or something overwhelmingly strong. But that fear should be reserved for enemies, not comrades. We won. Shiji shouted, trying to turn the mood around. He knew he needed to lift everyone's spirits, to steer their feelings away from fearing Kushina or the Nine Tails. He's right, thought the shinobi. The Nine Tails is terrifying, yes, but its power is on our side. Why should we fear it? We should be celebrating. Without the Nine Tails and its Jinchuriki, many more of us would have died today. Surviving is a blessing, not a curse. A powerful comrade isn't a monster, they're a gift. The realization washed over them, and one by one, the fear vanished, replaced by determination and excitement. They began to cheer loudly. We won. Ha ha ha, those Hidden Sand Village bastards must have wet themselves. Kushina is unstoppable. Hundreds of voices joined together, chanting Kushina's name in admiration. Hearing her comrades cheer for her, Kushina felt overwhelmed. Just moments ago, she had felt like a monster in their eyes. But now they were chanting her name. She felt tears welling up, her heart full of emotion. The Nine Tails, who had been preparing a long-winded lecture for Kushina, now found itself speechless. It seemed its planned talk about the flaws of fearing power was now unnecessary. Still, hearing people cheer for it and speak its name with reverence gave the Nine Tails a strange feeling. Was it excited? Humphrey. The Nine Tails scoffed internally. As if I would be swayed by something like this. You can praise me all you want, but it won't change my opinion of you humans. Yet the slight smile on its face suggested otherwise. Looks like our Kushina is about to cry from all this attention. Takaya teased with a laugh. You stop that. Kushina huffed, her face flushed. Everyone laughed, the warmth spreading through the group, dispelling the lingering tension. No one was afraid of Kushina anymore. Instead, they were wondering if their next opponents might just faint at the sight of her power, of Nine Tails' terrifying might. Chapter 411, Chio bows down, requests peace talks. Sometimes, changing a person's mind isn't all that difficult. Once a thought takes root in someone's mind, they tend to keep drifting back to it, unconsciously believing it's the right path. And since the Nine Tails hadn't yet gone on a rampage within Hidden Leaf Village, there was little resistance to accepting Kushina. If this had been after the night of the Nine Tails, however, things would have been different. As for the events of the Battle of the Valley of the End, how many people even remembered? Moreover, the village had purposely sealed that information. The common villagers, even most shinobi, including the third Hokage's generation, had only a vague understanding. This meant that Kushina and the Nine Tails being accepted by the village wasn't such a difficult task. Just like how, in the original storyline, Gaara had been treated as a monster, leading to his emotional isolation and insanity. Later, after being defeated by Naruto, and due to Hidden Sand Village's lack of capable leaders, Gaara had no choice but to step up and protect everyone with his strength, gradually changing people's perception of him. He eventually became the fifth Kazekage, earning everyone's respect. If Gaara, who'd had the one-tail rampage multiple times, causing endless tragedy, could gain acceptance, why couldn't Kushina? As long as no one sabotaged her image from behind the scenes, Kushina and the Nine Tails' acceptance was just a matter of time. And if anyone dared try, Takaya would make sure they understood the meaning of regret. Takaya's forces had achieved a resounding victory, and the news spread quickly. Nara Shikashige couldn't stop smiling, already convinced that Tsunada's decision to send Kushina for reinforcements had been entirely correct. Kakashi Hatake was also pleasantly surprised and immediately ordered a retreat, unwilling to continue clashing with Chio. If he could avoid it, he didn't want Hidden Leaf Village's shinobi to lose their lives on the battlefield. While Hidden Leaf Village celebrated, the mood in Hidden Sand Village's camp was incredibly bleak. When Chio heard that over 1,000 of their shinobi had been annihilated and that Raza had been captured, her vision darkened, and she almost passed out. The death of over 1,000 shinobi was an unbearable loss for Hidden Sand Village. But what was even worse was the capture of Raza. The entire new generation, the village's future pillars, was gone. Although Chio had struggled with the capture of Pakura, she had still managed to accept it. On the battlefield, anything could happen. But with the third Kazekage dead and Sasori having defected, Chio felt as if the sky itself was crumbling. And now, with Raza captured, her emotional defenses shattered completely. Are you sure it was the Jinchuriki? Chio finally spoke after a long silence, her voice raspy and heavy. Abizo lowered his head, guilt clear in his expression. Yes, It was Hidden Leaf Village's Nine Tails Jinchuriki. We were hit by the tailed beast bomb as soon as we reached the battlefield. Only a handful of us, including myself, survived. The rest vanished along with the forest. Shinobi were known for their high attack power but low defense, except for freaks like the third Raikage. Against an attack capable of vaporizing entire forests, rock, and earth, leaving behind a corpse seemed impossible. There wasn't even a body left to recover. I understand. Go rest now, I'll take care of what's next. Chiyo replied, her voice tinged with exhaustion. She seemed to have aged overnight, her once straight posture now slightly hunched. The battle had dealt her a severe blow. Raza's capture had shattered her remaining composure. Though she still held considerable authority over the village, she knew she couldn't lead forever. While the Hidden Leaf Village camp erupted in celebration, the Hidden Sand Village camp was eerily silent. Chiyo sat quietly in the command tent throughout the night. Early the next morning, she set out with a few guards, approaching Hidden Leaf Village's lines. I am here to announce, on behalf of Hidden Sand Village, our desire to end this war. We hope Hidden Leaf Village will grant us the opportunity for peace talks. Chiyo's personal appearance was a clear sign. Hidden Sand Village could no longer continue the fight. Negotiations were inevitable. Whatever terms Hidden Leaf Village proposed, no matter how harsh, Chiyo would have to accept them. She couldn't allow Hidden Sand Village to remain bogged down in the quagmire of war, nor could she allow Raza to be lost to them. So soon? Takuya looked a bit puzzled when the Anbu came to report. A lost battle, along with the capture of their future leader. Unless Chiyo had lost her sanity, there was no way they could continue this war. The display of strength by Kushina and the Nine Tails had left Hidden Sand Village with no other option. Surrendering now would allow them to preserve at least some of their power. The longer they dragged this out, the worse it would be for them. No one could guarantee that Raza wouldn't be harmed during the war. Hidden Leaf Village's interrogation department was already very interested in Raza. If Takuya hadn't explicitly ordered them not to interfere, Raza would probably have been in their clutches by now, already undergoing their methods. Takuya had thought Chiyo would hold out a bit longer, but here she was, requesting peace talks after just one night. Could this be a trap? Kakashi Hatake questioned, also finding it unusual. This didn't seem like Chiyo's usual way of handling things. Even Narashikashige, the brilliant strategist, was a bit stumped. Sometimes, the more intelligent a person was, the more they overthought things. Like now, for instance, Shikashige had spent the night trying to analyze Chiyo's motives until his thoughts had gotten all tangled. Unlikely, Takuya said, sipping tea with a calm smile. Instead of thinking it's some sort of trap, it's more likely that Chiyo's spirit has been broken. She's tired and doesn't want to see Hidden Sand Village's foundation destroyed. She doesn't want Raza to be returned to them as a broken shell. Once Raza ended up in the hands of the interrogation department, even if he came out in one piece, his mind might never be the same. That kind of place wasn't for humans. Ahem. Shikashige coughed pointedly, glaring at Takuya. After all, the interrogation department was mostly run by the Yamanaka clan, who were part of the Inoshikacho trio. Takuya's comments had essentially roped the entire trio into the critique. Just a metaphor, Shikashige-senpai. No need to take it to heart. Besides, the Nara clan isn't really involved in the interrogation department, so what's there to worry about? Shikashige's reaction made Takuya chuckle. You brat. Shikashige sighed, half amused, half exasperated. Fine, let's hear what you propose. I don't have any big ideas. We hold the advantage now, whether we want to keep fighting or begin peace talks, it's our decision to make. Peace talks are a must, though. We should send word back to the village. The situation at the coastline is dire, and the village could use some uplifting news to boost morale and confidence. Takuya had no intention of racking his brain over this. Better to inform Tsunade and leave the rest to her. As for Hidden Sand Village, they could wait. He'd let them know that peace talks were possible but only after the village had given a response. This would at least reassure Chiyo that they weren't planning to harm Raza and had merely taken him into custody. Since you were appointed by Tsunade, we'll follow your lead. Shikashige said, exchanging a glance with Kakashi Hatake. He was more than willing to defer. He wanted to end the war as soon as possible and return to the village to enjoy his retirement. Better to let the younger generation take on these responsibilities. After all, it wouldn't look good if the old kept taking on burdens meant for the young. Chapter 412, Tsunade, cross me, and the Elder Council is done for. Bonus, Kakashi Hatake was somewhat understandable. Once bitten by a snake, he'd been fearful of ropes for a decade. His heart had been shattered, and turning it around wouldn't be easy. If Tsunade herself hadn't stepped up, it was entirely possible Sakamo wouldn't have even been willing to leave the village, let alone fight on the battlefield. However, Nara Shikashige's behavior left Takuya baffled. Fear of being implicated, seriously? The Nara clan was firmly in the Hokage's camp, so why would they fear getting caught in some whirlpool of turmoil? Ridiculous. It was obvious the clan's laziness had simply kicked in. The news of Hidden Sand Village's heavy losses and their desire for peace talks reached Hidden Leaf Village quickly. Thanks to the messenger hawks from the intelligence division, it only took a few hours for the news to travel back. In Hidden Leaf Village, within the Hokage's office, the third Hokage, who had been away for quite some time, was finally back in the office where he had spent so many years. After reaching agreements with the daimyo on various supplies, resources, and financial support, the third Hokage returned to Hidden Leaf Village in haste. While in the daimyo's residence, it was impossible to receive updates promptly. Having been away from Hidden Leaf Village for so long, the third Hokage was eager to return. As soon as he was back, he took his seat in the Hokage's office. Upon his return, Tsunade also immediately handed over authority back to him. However, before the third Hokage even had a moment to breathe a sigh of relief, the Elders' Council came knocking. Koharu Utatane and Hamura Midokado were highly displeased with Tsunade's decision to secretly allow Kushina to leave the village for the front lines. Unfortunately for them, with the third Hokage absent, they had no one to complain to and had to hold their frustration in. But now that the third Hokage was back, the two elders felt like they had found their footing again. They immediately dropped everything to storm into the Hokage's office. What? Upon learning that Kushina had left the village for the front lines, the third Hokage was completely taken aback. Are you kidding me? Tsunade, I need an explanation. The third Hokage said darkly, his face showing his displeasure. Allowing Kushina to leave the village had been his bottom line. But to his surprise, that bottom line had been crossed in his absence. An explanation? What explanation? Tsunade continued sorting through the documents on her desk, not even bothering to look up. The front lines needed reinforcements, and Kushina was the best choice. Are you saying Kushina isn't capable of protecting herself? Tsunade. Koharu Utatane couldn't hold back anymore. She nearly leaped to her feet, pointing an accusatory finger at Tsunade. The Jinchuriki is of great importance. You've constantly indulged her, but even while she was in the village, enemies managed to infiltrate and cause trouble. Now that she's gone, she'll definitely be targeted. If the Nine Tails goes berserk, who will be responsible? These insufferable old fools. Tsunade thought. While the third Hokage was away, they hadn't dared to make a peep. But now that he was back, they were all bluster and noise. Finally looking up, Tsunade fixed Koharu with a cold glare. Her voice was filled with authority. If anything happens to Kushina, I'll take responsibility. Are you satisfied with that answer? Tsunade. Hamura Midokado chimed in. Regardless, allowing Kushina to leave without proper approval was reckless. It's dangerous. Hold on. Tsunade interrupted angrily, pulling out a document and throwing it onto the desk. If you two elders have time to worry about Kushina, maybe you should worry about yourselves instead. Can you please explain to me where the finance department's funds have disappeared to? There were major issues with the finance department, Tsunade had long known this. But even she had not anticipated the sheer scale of the problems there. The deeper she dug, the worse it got. Vast amounts of money simply unaccounted for. She had agreed with the third Hokage to let bygones be bygones, on the condition that the Elders' Council didn't cause trouble for her. But it seemed that as soon as the third Hokage was back, they couldn't resist. If that was the case, then why should she hold back? They wanted to talk about Kushina? Fine, they could talk about her after something actually happened to her. For now, let's settle the finance department's accounts. Funds? Koharu Utatane, who had been fuming, suddenly paused. Even Hamura Midokado hadn't expected Tsunade to bring this up. The third Hokage opened the document, giving it a careful read. After a moment, he looked up. Tsunade, stop messing around. These funds were personally approved by me. The third Hokage felt like Tsunade was intentionally stirring up trouble by digging up old issues. He had already discussed this with her. They had agreed to let the past go. Bringing it up now was like she was deliberately undermining him. And what about the supplies? Tsunade wasn't interested in sparing the third Hokage's feelings. Letting bygones be bygones was conditional. She wouldn't tolerate anyone giving her trouble. Slamming her hand on the table, Tsunade demanded loudly, these funds were for medical supplies. But upon investigating the logistics division's inventory records, there was no matching entry for those supplies. There's no way the logistics division could make such an error. So where did those funds go? Damn it. Koharu Utatane and Hamura Midokado's expressions changed. They were suddenly on the defensive. A bad feeling swept over them as they remembered certain past actions. The third Hokage's brows furrowed. Now even he was sensing something was wrong. It seemed that his two old companions might have gotten involved in something he was unaware of. The funds had been allocated, Yet the corresponding supplies had never made it to the inventory. That only meant the money had disappeared somewhere along the way. The people in charge of purchasing back then? The Elder Council. It couldn't be. The third Hokage thought of one person, Danzō. Koharu and Homura might have craved power and helped their own clans, but they would never blatantly betray the village. If they weren't directly responsible, then someone else must have been. Who else in Hidden Leaf Village had the audacity for this kind of move? It didn't take much imagination to figure it out. Danzō, the Shadow Hokage. The expansion of Harut, as well as his never-ending research projects, required astronomical funds. And since the third Hokage would never approve that much money for Harut, Danzō had found other means, taking advantage of Koharu and Homura. The third Hokage's expression darkened. Danzō, Danzō, always Danzō. How many times had he done things behind my back that harmed the village? Bang. Before the third Hokage could even speak, Tsunade slapped the desk, her voice laced with anger. The funds are just a small problem. Who gave you the authority to insert your own people into the Anbu? The Anbu is directly under the Hokage's command. Since when did the Elder Council get to decide anything about it? Or is it that you're the real power behind the scenes, running this village? That accusation was no small matter. If proven, the consequences for the elders wouldn't be any better than what Danzō had faced. During the third Hokage's absence, Tsunade had done a lot, including looking into old accounts and cleaning up Anbu. Good grief. Not to mention external postings, even within the village itself, there were quite a few traitors. Danzō and the Elder Council had both tried to infiltrate Anbu, inserting their own loyalists who, on the surface, appeared to answer to the Hokage but were actually beholden to them. If Tsunade hadn't secretly sought out the Yamanaka clan leader to interrogate those loyal to Danzō, she wouldn't have discovered just how compromised Anbu had become. The terrifying thing was that the infiltration happened after the last Anbu purge. That purge had made such a splash, and yet it had only provided cover for deeper infiltration. How long was I away from Hidden Leaf Village? Why does it feel like everything's fallen apart since I left? What the hell is going on? The third Hokage demanded, his voice filled with frustration. Chapter 413, Are you placing spies in the Anbu to watch me as Hokage? Upon returning to the village, the third Hokage found himself blindsided by Tsunade's series of forceful accusations. His mind was buzzing, struggling to keep up with the sudden developments, and his focus on Kushina's deployment had quickly been derailed. See for yourself. Tsunade said coldly, throwing a pile of documents onto the desk. She crossed her arms, leaning back, clearly ready for a showdown. The third Hokage quickly began to read, while Koharu Utatane and Homura Midokado stood by, their expressions mirroring the gravity of the situation. They were beginning to realize the extent of the trouble they were in. If they hadn't come here to pick a fight, they might have dodged a bullet. Tsunade had her hands full, and though she had been itching to settle old scores, it would likely have waited until she officially assumed the Hokage position. By then, their misdeeds would have carried less weight, perhaps ending in a quiet retirement. But now, everything had been laid bare, and things looked grim. Koharu, Homura, I need an explanation. The third Hokage said after quickly skimming the documents. The more he read, the more his heart sank. The Anbu, the Black Ops, mostly carried out missions in the shadows, many of which were ethically gray at best. But these missions were always under the Hokage's orders and done for the good of the village. However, the documents Tsunade provided detailed numerous questionable and outright dark operations, carried out specifically by the Anbu members who had been placed into the organization. The third Hokage didn't need much imagination to understand what had happened. This was blatant abuse of power. It was Danzō. Koharu quickly said before the third Hokage could lose his temper, immediately throwing Danzō under the bus. Everything was Danzō's fault, at least, that was the line they were taking. They had merely helped plant a few people in the Anbu ranks. They might have known what was going on, but the actual dirty deeds were carried out on Danzō's orders. Danzō hadn't consulted them on everything, and at times had even actively hidden details from them. They might have been allies in their scheming, but when push came to shove, saving themselves was the priority. And given that they had already warned Danzō not to go too far, they felt little guilt in blaming him now. If he could, the third Hokage would have cursed aloud. Danzō had completely lost his mind. Instead of focusing on the Root division, Danzō had planted his agents in the Anbu? Was he trying to keep an eye on Sarutobi Hiruzen himself? The very thought infuriated him. The Anbu were meant to be directly under the Hokage's command. If there were infiltrators among them, it meant the Hokage's every move could be monitored by outside parties. The third Hokage's face darkened considerably at the implications. Suppressing his growing anger, he glanced at Koharu, who had chosen to speak first. Homura, seeing his partner's actions, also decided to come clean. Danzo asked us to help place a few people. We didn't think it was a good idea to refuse him, but we warned him. He promised he wouldn't do anything reckless. Hamura said. The third Hokage gave a mirthless chuckle. Warned him not to monitor me, or warned him not to abuse the Anbu for his own ends. A warning was meaningless. The moment they helped Danzo infiltrate the Anbu, they had compromised everything. Tsunade looked like she was enjoying herself, a hint of a smile tugging at her lips. These old fossils never learned, just like Takuya had said. A knock at the door broke the tension in the room, cutting through the charged silence. Despite their heated conflict, both the third Hokage and the elders were careful not to show any outward animosity. Appearances still mattered. Come in. The third Hokage called, adjusting his demeanor. The door opened, and a member of the intelligence division quickly entered. He saluted before handing a scroll over to Tsunade. Hokage-sama, Lady Tsunade, this is an urgent report from the front lines. He announced before giving polite greetings to Koharu and Hamura. Though they were in terrible moods, Koharu and Hamura acknowledged the greeting, maintaining their dignified facade. I'll take that. Tsunade said, taking the scroll. She swiftly broke the seal and decoded the message, her face relaxing into a smile as she read. Good news, finally. Tsunade wasn't the only one hoping. The third Hokage, Koharu, and Hamura all watched her intently. If the village fell, what would their titles and influence mean? Nothing. They understood this well. They might have clashed internally, but ultimately, they all stood to benefit from Hidden Lee Village's prosperity. I knew it. That kid did it. Kushina didn't let me down. Tsunade said, finally letting out a breath of relief. She tossed the scroll to the third Hokage, reaching for a hidden stash of sake in the office, a drink she had stored for times like this, to help unwind. Seeing Tsunade relax like that was enough of a sign for the third Hokage to smile as well. He quickly read through the scroll and soon broke into a grin. However, there was a hint of awkwardness in his expression. Noticing Koharu and Hamura practically craning their necks, the third Hokage spoke aloud, it's good news. Takuya and Kushina did well. Hidden Sand Village suffered a major defeat, losing countless troops, and their future leader, Raza, has been captured. They've been forced to seek peace talks. With Pikura captured, the third Kazekage dead, Sasori defected, and now Raza captured, these were all major victories to celebrate. The only thorn for the third Hokage was that Takuya, whom he hadn't fully trusted, was behind it all. And Kushina? If the third Hokage had been in the village, she wouldn't have even been allowed to leave for the battlefield. But here she was, not only deployed but victorious. Takuya kept accumulating merits, and Kushina had earned fame in one battle, striking fear into the hearts of Hidden Sand Village. It wouldn't be long before the name of the Nine Tails Jinchuriki echoed across the shinobi world. Most importantly, if Hidden Sand Village wanted peace, it meant the war would soon end. Even if Hidden Leaf Village had to reduce its demands, the third Hokage was prepared to accept it. Fighting on two fronts was an immense strain on the village. That's fantastic. Koharu and Hamura exclaimed, visibly brightening. But their smiles soon turned awkward when they noticed Tsunade, still holding her sake bottle, glaring at them. They gave sheepish smiles, barely able to conceal their discomfort. Since Hidden Sand Village wants peace talks, who should we send to handle the negotiations? Chapter 414, the third Hokage personally heads to the front line. Fortunately, the third Hokage quickly eased the tension between the two elders, bringing up the topic of choosing a negotiator. Takuya had accomplished so much, it would be fitting to send him for the talks. He had managed to push Hidden Sand Village to the brink on the battlefield, making him an ideal representative. However, seeing that the third Hokage didn't seem inclined to make that decision, Tsunade decided not to mention it. Do whatever you want, old man. The war on the Eastern Front is still raging, and I have no time to deal with this trivial nonsense. The negotiations would just be a game of bargaining, trying to secure advantages and benefits, and Tsunade knew Takuya wasn't fond of such tedious tasks. Besides, since the third Hokage seemed interested, she decided to let him handle it. Perhaps I could. Koharu Utatane began, glancing at Hamura Mitakato, intending to volunteer herself to redeem her recent mistakes. Before she could even finish, the third Hokage spoke up, in that case, I shall personally go. Wait, what? Tsunade looked stunned. You're going in person? The idea of the third Hokage going himself caught everyone off guard, and Koharu nearly sprained her back from shock. And what about the village? Hamura tried to ask. Normally, Koharu and Hamura would be the obvious choices for such a task, but considering their current precarious situation, they were too embarrassed to bring it up directly. They knew Tsunade wouldn't let them off the hook that easily. The village is in Tsunade's capable hands, I have no concerns about that. Therefore, I shall head to the front lines myself to meet with Chio. The third Hokage genuinely felt that Tsunade had performed exceptionally well, beyond his expectations. Though reluctant to admit it, it was true. If Tsunade could manage everything, it made sense for him to handle negotiations on the front line, leaving the village in her care. This was also a gesture of trust and authority transfer. In a way, it was a sign of endorsement. The feudal lord also desired this arrangement. When the third Hokage personally traveled to the feudal lord's court, leaving Tsunade in charge, it was tantamount to officially recognizing her as his successor. Supporting Tsunade was also a decision the feudal lord found favorable, especially since Tsunade was family to him, making her more trustworthy than Orochimaru. Concerns about hurting Orochimaru's feelings were no longer a priority. The third Hokage was focused solely on what was best for Hidden Leaf Village, for its future. "Are you serious, old man?" Tsunade sighed in exasperation. "There's already a pile of nonsense to deal with here, and now you're trying to cause more trouble? Are you kidding me? I assure you, I'm quite serious." The third Hokage gave a faint smile. He understood Koharu and Hamore's unspoken desire to offer their services, seeking to atone and restore their standing. Under different circumstances, he would have agreed, but not now. He needed to be the one to personally oversee this matter. Besides, leaving Tsunade in charge was a silent yet powerful deterrent to those in the village. Ironically, whenever he was away, Danzo and the elders seemed to behave themselves. But as soon as he returned, they couldn't seem to stay still. "Fine, do as you please," Tsunade said, waving him off dismissively, wanting nothing more than for him to leave her alone. She wished he'd just leave the village, at least for a while, so some people would finally settle down and stop their scheming. Tsunade had come to realize that, for some reason, whenever the third Hokage was present in the village, Danzo and the elders acted as if they were untouchable, believing that no matter what mistakes they made, the third Hokage would always protect them. The third Hokage, sensing Tsunade's annoyance, chuckled. "I'll leave the village to you, then. As soon as negotiations conclude, I'll return. I know Orochimaru may still need your assistance." "Assistance, my foot." Tsunade bit back the urge to curse. The war with the mist isn't ending anytime soon, and we don't see any hope for resolution on the horizon. Luckily, with Jiraiya and Orochimaru there, and Minato aiding them, Mist Village has suffered significant losses. It's just a matter of time until they collapse. Minato, eh? That boy has a lot of promise. The third Hokage had always believed that Minato was someone worth investing in. Minato had never let him down, gaining tremendous momentum through the war. His Flying Thunder God Jutsu was enough to strike fear in the hearts of the Mist Ninja. No one could be sure when Minato would suddenly appear beside them, ready to take off someone's head or pierce someone's heart. Dealing with an enemy like that, who appeared out of nowhere, put immense strain on one's psyche. Minato's rise to power wasn't as flashy as Takuya's, but he had steadily climbed the ranks. Now known as the Yellow Flash, Minato's reputation had already spread across the ninja world, and information about him was laid out on the desks of every village leader. Not only Minato but Nawaki's growth had also been commendable. While not as brilliant as Minato's, it had been steady and satisfactory. With the ongoing pressure from the villagers, Sarutobi Hiruzen, I'm afraid your seat won't remain yours for much longer. Tsunade, tired of the Hokage's musings, interrupted him with her assessment. Based on my investigation and evaluation, Mist Village is on the verge of collapse. What's strange is that, despite repeated sabotage of their supply lines and constant disruptions, they continue to launch fierce attacks. It's as if their leadership is deliberately sacrificing the Mist Ninja, sending them to die on the battlefield. There were whispers within the higher ranks of Mist Village about the third Mizukage being controlled. However, such things were tightly sealed, and Tsunade was merely deducing from her observations, leading to this puzzling conclusion. Were the leaders of Mist Village simply insane? Fighting across the ocean already put Mist at a logistical disadvantage, and they constantly faced sabotage from Hidden Leaf Village. Despite suffering significant losses, thanks to Orochimaru and Jiraiya, Hidden Leaf Village still had the backing of reinforcements and supplies. Despite setbacks, Hidden Leaf Village's confidence had only grown with each battle. So, what was Mist's strategy for a prolonged war? They lacked the resources for a consistent supply chain, they didn't have the manpower to match Hidden Leaf Village, and the village itself had recently been in disarray, disturbed by Takuya, internal strife within the bloodline families, and general unrest. Yet they fought relentlessly, as if their ninjas' lives were worth nothing, attacking Hidden Leaf Village's lines as if driven by madness. Indeed, it's suspicious. If possible, we should investigate. There might be a weakness we can exploit to win the war. The third Hokage said. I understand. Tsunade nodded, glancing at the third Hokage as he puffed on his pipe, seemingly unperturbed by the mess that was the Anbu. Gritting her teeth, she thought, once he leaves, I'll have to sort all this out quickly. Otherwise, when he returns, there'll be nothing but chaos. When are you leaving? She asked. Immediately, replied the third Hokage, taking a drag from his pipe. Once I finish this pipe, I'll take a few guards and leave. No time could be wasted. The sooner this war ended, the sooner Hidden Leaf Village could withdraw its troops, allowing them to rest or redeploy to support the Eastern Front. Most importantly, ending the war with Hidden Sand Village would free up Hidden Leaf Village to focus entirely on dealing with Mist Village. Fine, pick your guards yourself. I won't help you with that. And if you're going, hurry up, there's still a ton of things I need to deal with. Chapter 415, Hidden Stones Village begins to stir the third Hokage. He hadn't expected the day would come when he would be resented by his own student, a day when he would be driven out of the Hokage's office by his successor. Even though it was just a chair and not the entire Hokage title, it was still a bitter pill to swallow. Coughing lightly, the third Hokage put out his pipe, stowed it away, and left with Koharu Utatane and Hamura Midokado in tow. The three left the Hokage's office in silence. On their way to the Sarutobi clan's residence, the third Hokage spoke gravely. I'll take responsibility for what happened this time, but let me make this clear, no more chances. Danzo's actions have nothing to do with either of you anymore. Do not cause any more trouble for Tsunade. She's not as forgiving as I am. Reflect on this, you can either assist Tsunade quietly or continue supporting Danzo and end up facing Tsunade's reckoning. The third Hokage was at his limit in terms of what he could tolerate. Watching the Hokage's retreating figure, both elders' faces looked grim. It was a warning, a rebuke. It was also a reminder that Sarutobi Hiruzen was preparing to step down. The villagers' discontent, their lack of trust, and even the daimyo's stance all pointed to the inevitable conclusion: his time as Hokage was ending. When the war concluded, he would be stepping down immediately. As long as he was in power, the third Hokage could still cover up for the elders. As long as things didn't escalate too far, he could keep it under wraps. But once he stepped down, and Tsunade took over as the fourth Hokage, the elders wouldn't even be able to act. Forget about causing trouble, they'd be lucky not to be stripped of their ranks and quietly retired. If things went poorly, they wouldn't even have the chance to retire peacefully. First, their positions would be revoked, their authority stripped, and they would be sent into retirement. Then, out of the public eye, they'd be dealt with. Once things quieted down, who would remember them? The elders of the council. Let's go. This is no longer our concern. Danzo's issues will be Tsunade's to handle. Hamura sighed after a long silence. Their relationship of shared interests with Danzo ended here. They could no longer help him, nor could they afford any further involvement, otherwise, they'd face consequences they couldn't escape. The news that Hidden Sand Village wanted peace talks and to end the war couldn't be concealed. In fact, it had to be widely publicized. Tsunade immediately ordered notices to be posted around the village. Within 2 hours, the entire Hidden Leaf Village was in an uproar. This was good news for the villagers, though it did seem surreal. Just the day before, everyone had been worrying about the ongoing war, and now, good news had arrived out of nowhere. Tsunade wasn't like the third Hokage. She wouldn't obscure Tokuya's achievements. Those who had earned merit were rewarded, and everything was clearly listed on the announcement. Haha, this is amazing. Kakashi Hatake-sama really is the bane of Hidden Sand Village. That's nothing. Look closer. Yagami Takuya-sama is incredible. He personally turned Hidden Sand Village's elite shinobi Sasori and took down the third Kazekage. Yagami Takuya? That name sounds unfamiliar. To most villagers, Kakashi Hatake was a familiar hero. Even if his reputation had been tarnished before, that was in the past. Now that he earned such a great achievement, people were quick to remember his contributions. Shikashage Nara was also a respected elder, but Takuya seemed like an unfamiliar name, as if he'd come out of nowhere. Even many shinobi had no strong impression of Takuya. The good news quickly spread to the coastal camp. Even though Tsunade had stepped up and taken control, it was ultimately an internal matter between her and the third Hokage. Orochimaru had no intention of hiding anything, and even if he wanted to, it wouldn't have worked. When the notices were posted, the entire camp erupted in excitement. You shouldn't have taken this position in the first place. If you'd let Takuya take it, we'd probably be done with the war by now, and back in the village resting. Jiraiya teased Orochimaru. Shut up. Orochimaru, usually composed, was visibly irked. The war between Hidden Leaf Village and Hidden Mist Village had dragged on for so long, and while there had been progress, there was no end in sight. On the other hand, the war with Hidden Sand Village had been wrapped up quickly and decisively. Anyone would feel a bit bitter after such a comparison. Orochimaru was furious, but Jiraiya wasn't fazed. He kept on smiling, adding, "It looks like we're getting old. The future of the village still rests with the younger generation." Speaking of which, that kid still owes me something. I'm very interested in what he said about ice style. Ice style, you say? Orochimaru shot Jiraiya a skeptical look. He wouldn't be surprised if Takuya one day showed up using ice style. Takuya was the kind of person who would do that. But Jiraiya. Orochimaru had no high hopes. Don't underestimate me, you damn snake. One day I'll show you just how strong the Toad Sage Jiraiya can be. After bickering for a while, Jiraiya stormed off. Orochimaru squinted at the distant sea. What's the real reason behind all this? Tsunade found it strange, and Orochimaru, who was leading the fight against Hidden Mist Village, felt the same. Everything about Hidden Mist Village's actions was suspect. But no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't uncover anything useful. Hidden Mist Village's willingness to throw lives at Hidden Leaf Village in relentless attacks made no sense to Orochimaru. He wished he could capture the third Mizukage and crack his skull open to see what he was thinking. After hearing the news, Minato felt that he still wasn't doing enough, that he needed to work even harder to catch up with Takuya. Nawaki, on the other hand, felt he'd lost out. If only he'd gone with Takuya, he'd have shared in the glory now. The war on the coast was suffocating and difficult. With the news spreading, other villages would inevitably learn of Hidden Sand Village's desire to negotiate peace with Hidden Leaf Village. Hidden Stones Village and Hidden Clouds Village, however, had little reaction. Hidden Clouds Village, being far away, continued watching from the sidelines. Hidden Stones Village, on the other hand, began moving actively, a development that gave Tsunade a headache. Hidden Stones Village's increasing activity was an absolutely bad sign for Hidden Leaf Village. They might seize the opportunity to declare war, and if that happened, Hidden Leaf Village would be in trouble. With the war against Hidden Mist Village still raging, if Hidden Stones Village decided to attack next, Hidden Leaf Village would be overwhelmed. Even if the war with Hidden Sand Village ended in a truce, it was easy to imagine how much trouble Hidden Stones Village would bring to Hidden Leaf Village. After all, Hidden Stones Village's military might was in no way inferior to Hidden Leaf Village's. This was one tough bone to chew. Chapter 416, Naruto weighs the pros and cons. Why is he personally coming here? Casually tossing the scroll over to Naruto, Takuya rubbed his temples and cleared his throat, saying, "Senior, get ready. The Hokage should arrive by this afternoon." The fact that the third Hokage had personally came to negotiate with Hidden Sand Village was something no one could have expected. Takuya figured they would just send one of the elders from the council and that would be it. Who knew that the head of Hidden Leaf Village would actually show up in person? This is bad, really bad. If the Hokage himself shows up at the front lines, what am I supposed to do? Kushina's face went pale. She knew the third Hokage was very much a proponent of stability, someone who had always insisted that she should never leave the village. If it were someone else, Kushina could just ignore them and let Tsunade deal with the aftermath. But with the Hokage himself coming, Kushina felt completely paralyzed. Well, since the Hokage is coming, let's just prepare to receive him properly. Naruto sighed. Even though having the Hokage come personally might seem like an overreaction, since he was already on his way, there wasn't much else to do. All they could do was prepare to welcome him. Shikashage glanced at Kushina, who seemed genuinely scared, and shook his head. She had talked big about running away, but now she was afraid the Hokage might use the opportunity to question her presence on the front lines. If things got awkward, the fallout wouldn't be good. It was better to handle things peacefully at a crucial time like this. Kakashi Hatake, on the other hand, seemed indifferent. Ever since the defamation incident, the third Hokage's stature in his eyes had fallen. Nowadays, Sakamo focused on doing his job well, leaving everything else to others. It didn't matter to him who handled what. "I'll have to leave this to you, senior. I'm planning to take Kushina for a walk, let her relax a bit," Takuya said. Kushina wasn't in a good mental state, and besides, there was still Pakura. The Hokage could very well use the chance to brainwash her and recruit her to his side, something Takuya wouldn't allow. Plus, Takuya wasn't exactly fond of the Hokage. Whatever negotiations he wanted to conduct, let him handle it himself. He could discuss it with Tsunade if needed. Naruto was stunned for a moment before a wry smile appeared on his face. "Is this really okay?" Shikashage wanted to object. As a member of the Nara clan, he knew about some things that weren't made public. He knew that Takuya held a significant grudge against the third Hokage, and with Kushina here, avoiding the Hokage seemed like a reasonable decision. It sounded nice to say, "Let's go for a walk." But in truth, it was more like, "I just don't want to deal with you." What's wrong with it? Takuya didn't care. His relationship with the third Hokage was strained to the point of almost breaking. Besides, I received secret orders from Tsunade to bring Kushina and Pakura back as soon as possible, just in case anything unexpected happens. Now that the Hokage is here, I think I can leave the camp in capable hands and head back. You expect me to believe that? Shikashige felt speechless, and Sakamo couldn't help but laugh out loud. Secret orders? There were none, just a convenient excuse to prevent things from getting too awkward. What are you standing around for? Hurry up and pack your things so we can leave. Takuya nudged Kushina. She snapped out of her daze, her face brightening as she eagerly ran off to get her things. Bakura rolled her eyes and followed. She was getting used to it. Hidden Leaf Village's internal struggles seemed even worse than Hidden Sand Village's. Bakura had heard rumors before, but she never imagined the reality would be this extreme. Bakura had decided to fully align herself with Hidden Leaf Village. After all, she'd already secured Roz's survival. She felt she no longer owed anything to Hidden Sand Village. Given the choice, why choose the worst path? Why not just live well? With Takuya, once a decision was made, there was no hesitation. They packed up and left, even choosing a detour to avoid running into the Hokage on the way back to Hidden Leaf Village. But while Takuya could just pat his back and leave, someone had to deal with the mess he left behind. Nara Shikashige instinctively looked at Kakashi Hatake, who promptly stood up and said, I'll go keep an eye on Raza, just to make sure nothing happens. Don't expect me to clean up your mess. You can handle it on your own. Shikashige was left in a dilemma. Helping mend outright deceiving the third Hokage, and although it was clear to everyone why they were doing this, lending a hand would make him complicit. If he didn't help, he'd make a bigger enemy out of Takuya, and by extension, Kushina, Tsunade, Minato, and even Nawaki. They were all tightly connected. The Nara clan wouldn't survive alienating them. Shikashige was already an old man, well past retirement age. He wouldn't have even been here if he hadn't been pulled back into service. But he was retired, his clan wasn't. If they crossed those who were destined to hold power, life for the Nara clan would become significantly harder. Not to mention, once Tsunade took power, if she decided she couldn't trust the Nara clan, it would be a disaster. That damn brat has me cornered. Shikashige muttered, finally slapping his hand down on the desk. Takuya had clearly anticipated all this when he had decided to leave, knowing Shikashige would have no choice but to help. Shikashige grumbled, but he knew what he had to do. Are we really just leaving like this? Won't Nara-senpai be held accountable? Kushina looked worried as they walked. Leaving the camp so abruptly might cause issues for Nara Shikashige if the Hokage decided to pursue the matter. Tsunade could cover for her decision to come to the front lines, but the third Hokage was a stubborn man, firmly believing a Jinchuriki should never leave the village. He won't. Takuya reassured her, smiling as he ruffled her fiery red hair. If Shikashige-senpai was really going to be in trouble, he wouldn't have let us leave so easily. Besides, upsetting us doesn't do him any good. As for the Hokage? What's he going to do? As long as we don't flaunt our presence in front of him, there won't be an issue. And if there is, well, we'll just show him the aftermath of a few more blown-up mountains. That old man doesn't have the backbone to stand up to it. You two are unbelievable. Bakura gave Takuya a wide-eyed stare as if she were looking at a madman. Who would dare slander their own village leader like that? Not only was Takuya slandering him, but he was also practically telling Kushina to threaten the Hokage if it came down to it. In Hidden Sand Village, someone acting like this would be torn to pieces. It seemed Hidden Leaf Village's internal politics were far more entertaining than she'd ever imagined. Chapter 417, Rules are set, but people make exceptions. Thinking about her feud with Raza, Bakura sighed deeply. Compared to the issues in Hidden Leaf Village, her situation was child's play, barely worth mentioning. Nah, I don't want to. I might end up scaring the Hokage. Kushina said, her words suggesting reluctance, but her expression betraying otherwise. Judging from her squinted eyes and sly grin, she was already planning something. If the third Hokage really tried to make trouble for her, she wouldn't hesitate to blow up a few more mountain tops to make her point. Takuya laughed heartily, the only one not finding it amusing being Bakura. Now fully defected, Bakura couldn't help but worry. Would she face suspicion or hostility in Hidden Leaf Village? How was she supposed to integrate herself into the village now? There was no turning back for her, only the hope that Takuya wouldn't betray her trust, otherwise, her future in Hidden Leaf Village would be tough. Thanks to Takuya taking a longer route to avoid a direct meeting, the group managed to avoid any encounter with the third Hokage on their way back to camp. Lord Hokage. The Hokage's personal appearance on the front line stirred great excitement among Hidden Leaf Village's shinobi. Everyone found a spot to stand in orderly fashion. Even some of the injured ignored their medical aids to come witness his arrival. You all have worked hard. The third Hokage said warmly, waving at the assembled shinobi, his face adorned with a kind smile. Yet, as he looked around, his eyes searched for someone in particular, Kushina. Despite scanning the entire area, he found no trace of either Kushina or Takuya. Not seeing Takuya was understandable, their relationship was strained, after all. But where was Kushina? Shikashage, where is Kushina? He asked. They had barely made it to the command tent, his seat hardly warm, when the third Hokage brought her up. Shikashage sighed inwardly. I knew I wouldn't escape this. Kushina has already returned to Hidden Leaf Village. Shikashage said with a weary smile. She must have missed you on the road, Lord Hokage. What? I just arrived, and she left already? Was this a coincidence, or deliberate? And whose idea was it? Seeing the change in the Hokage's face, Shikashage cleared his throat. Takuya mentioned that keeping Kushina here for too long was unsafe, the risk of enemies or spies targeting her was high. And since Tsunade had sent orders, he took Kushina and Bakura back ahead of time. You expect me to believe that? A so-called order from Tsunade, what a load of nonsense. The third Hokage knew well what had happened. Takuya wanted to avoid seeing him, and he especially didn't want Kushina involved, in case things turned ugly. This kid was getting more and more out of control. Frustrated, the Hokage slapped the table, opting to shift the topic instead. Whether Tsunade's order was real or not, for the sake of everyone's dignity, he had to pretend it was. Never mind. He said. As long as Takuya is with her, there shouldn't be any problems. Where's Sakamo? He's stationed at the front, keeping watch in case Hidden Sand Village changes its mind. Shikashage replied. Shikashage felt like crying. Takuya had left, avoiding dealing with the Hokage entirely. And Sakamo? He'd declared, I'll stay at the front to deter any betrayal from Hidden Sand Village. The command and is yours, along with the job of welcoming Lord Hokage. Great. Just great. These two kids had dumped everything on him, an old man. Sigh. Forget it. The third Hokage exhaled heavily. The so-called reason for Sakamo staying at the front lines was simply a convenient excuse to avoid seeing him. Ever since his name had been smeared, Sakamo's regard for the third Hokage had been shattered, and Sarutobi Hiruzen knew he was at fault. Send a message to Chiyo. He said. Tomorrow morning at 9, I will personally visit the border to negotiate peace. I expect her to be prepared. Understood. The message soon made its way to Chiyo, and she prepared for the talks. To her surprise, it was the third Hokage himself who was coming to negotiate. She had expected it to be Kakashi Hatake or Shikashage, or maybe one of Hidden Leaf Village's elders. The fact that the Hokage himself would be present underscored Hidden Leaf Village's seriousness. Sister, Sarutobi Hiruzen is personally coming to the front lines. It seems Hidden Leaf Village values these talks greatly. Ebizo noted. Of course they do. Chiyo responded with a cold smile. Hidden Leaf Village is fighting on two fronts. If the war continues, even if they win, they'll be drained. The sooner they can end things with us, the sooner they can focus on Hidden Mist Village. Having been around the block more times than most, Chiyo knew exactly why the Hokage was making an appearance. The more Hidden Leaf Village wanted these talks, the better deal Hidden Sand Village could negotiate, maybe even grab a few extra benefits. What about the war reparations? Ebizo asked, dreading the thought. Thinking about the potentially massive reparations weighed heavily on both Chiyo and Ebizo. Hidden Sand Village couldn't afford a crippling financial burden, or it would stagnate for years. I'll handle it. Chiyo said. We may have to give something up, but I won't allow it to destroy the village's future. Back in Hidden Leaf Village, night had fallen when Takuya, Kushina, and Bakura finally arrived. At the village gate, they hit a slight snag. Bakura wasn't yet a registered Hidden Leaf Village ninja, lacking any official documentation. Even with a headband, she was still considered an outsider. Bakura has defected from Hidden Sand Village and joined Hidden Leaf Village. Takuya said. Her registration as a Hidden Leaf Village ninja will be processed tomorrow. For now, let's keep it at that. All Takuya wanted was a hearty meal, a hot spring bath, and a good night's sleep. But, Lord Takuya, this isn't in line with regulations. The guard said hesitantly. Regulations? Takuya waved dismissively. If there's an issue, come find me. Just notify Tsunade, and tell her not to have the Anbu snoop around my house. Regulations, my foot. Since when did you lot demand regulations from Tsunade, or Orochimaru, or Jiraiya? Those three came and went as they pleased, brought whoever they wanted into the village, and not a single one of you raised the topic of regulations then. Let's go. Takuya said, stepping through the gate. Bleh. Kushina stuck her tongue out, skipping after him. After a moment of hesitation, Bakura followed suit. Chapter 418, Tsunade's final warning to the Anbu. The registrar's face turned completely dark, watching Takuya ignore him entirely and walk away without any explanation, leaving him helpless. Isn't this going to be a problem? Bakura asked, worry evident in her voice. What problem? Takuya replied, sounding irritated. It's just that old guy on duty today. Forget about him. I don't get along with the Sarutobi clan, especially not their clan head. As long as you don't have any ill intentions, Tsunoda will handle anything else. The Sarutobi and Shimura clans were always the types to look down on others. Right now, Takuya didn't have the patience to argue about regulations with them. He simply didn't care. Bakura, speechless, thought, isn't the Sarutobi clan head the third Hokage? Meanwhile, back at the Hokage's office, an Anbu member reported, Lady Tsunoda, Lord Takuya has returned with Kushina and Bakura. Bakura didn't have proper identification, and Lord Takuya refused to complete the registry, leading them away without complying. Got it. Anything else? Tsunoda was busy dealing with a pile of documents and didn't even look up. Of all things to report, they choose this. Where was this diligence when I brought people back myself? Well, yes. The Anbu member continued, a bit taken aback. Lord Takuya also mentioned that the person handling this matter should report to you. Moreover, he said he doesn't want any Anbu snooping around his house or keeping Bakura under surveillance. Report my ass. Tsunoda's patience was wearing thin, her pen snapped in her grip, her forehead veins visibly pulsing. Have they run out of things to do? Reporting every trivial matter to me? And as for you, how about you spend your time keeping an eye on Danzo instead of sneaking around other people's homes? Are all the people Takuya associates with so untrustworthy? If anything goes wrong, I'll take responsibility. Tsunoda's sudden outburst startled the Anbu operative, who quickly lowered his head, avoiding her blazing gaze. I tell you to monitor Danzo, and you fail. I tell you to track down the village's missing funds, and you can't find anything. I tell you to root out Root's spies in the Anbu, and you come up empty-handed. Yet the moment Takuya and Kushina return, you're suddenly eager to keep an eye on them. Is this the extent of the Anbu's abilities? Tsunoda spat. Were they trying to drive her mad? Enough. Get out there and do your job. Without my explicit orders, no surveillance. And if I find out that Anbu operatives are being deployed by the council or anyone else without proper authorization, then all you captains might as well hand in your resignations. Tsunoda's patience had hit its limit. It was baffling to her, why did the Anbu seem so eager to curry favor? Especially with the likes of the council and Danzo. She had warned them, time and again, but her words seemed to fall on deaf ears. Fine, if they wanted to keep playing this game, she'd strip them of their roles. Surely there had to be some trustworthy individuals in Hidden Lee Village willing to step into the Anbu's ranks. Is this a dream? Bakura wondered as she watched Kushina blowing bubbles in the hot spring beside her, her head a little foggy. From the moment she had stepped into Hidden Lee Village, Bakura had been on edge. She feared unfair treatment and constant surveillance. She feared Takuya would abandon her after bringing her here. But none of that had happened. Takuya had confidently escorted her into the village. He didn't even bother with the formalities of registration. He openly threatened the lurking Anbu, took her and Kushina out for a meal, and then brought them to a hot spring, luxuries she had never imagined. To top it off, the Anbu that had been shadowing them even disappeared. It really is more comfortable here in the village. Kushina remarked, contentedly. Sure, staying here for too long can get boring, but after running around outside, you come to appreciate the comforts of the village. At least you don't have to compromise on simple things. Unlike at the frontline camps, where even getting a hot bath is tough. She added, sinking a little deeper into the hot spring. What's on your mind? Kushina asked, noticing Bakura staring at her. Only her small head was above the water, as if she was trying to disappear entirely. Nothing. Bakura snapped back to reality. I was just curious, about Takuya's relationship with the higher-ups. She gestured vaguely. Is it really that bad? If he didn't see Hidden Lee Village as his home, Takuya would have probably taken a blade to them already. You tell me, is it that bad? Kushina replied, rolling her eyes. The only one among the upper ranks she had any respect for was the third Hokage. As for Danzo and the council? Forget it, they could stay far, far away. Okay, let's pretend I didn't ask, Bakura thought, unsure how to even respond to that. At least in Hidden Sand Village, no one would ever think of taking a blade to their leadership. Hidden Lee Village's internal politics ran far deeper than Hidden Sand Village's. After soaking in the hot spring, it was time to head home for some rest. Takuya, I'm heading back to rest. I'll come by tomorrow. Kushina waved and skipped away happily. Sitting in the living room, Bakura remained silent. Takuya hadn't arranged any other place for her to stay. It was clear that, for the time being, she'd be living at his house. What baffled her most was that Kushina, who had once been so hostile towards her, now didn't seem to care in the slightest whether she stayed at Takuya's house or what might happen. Pick whichever guest room you like, Takuya said. There's bedding in the wardrobe, and here are some pajamas and clothes. Just make do for now, we'll get new ones after sorting out your ninja registration tomorrow. The clothes were all Mikoto Uchiha's, though they clearly didn't fit Bakura well, too tight in all the wrong places. Takuya, however, couldn't be bothered to get anything else, so he just told her to deal with it. Bakura stood there in the pajamas, her eyes twitching as she looked at the clothes. She wasn't blind, those clothes clearly didn't belong to Kushina. Which raised a rather interesting question. Everyone knew about Takuya and Kushina's relationship, so why were there other women's clothes in his house, and from his bedroom, no less? Bakura's head was spinning. The next morning, with a sleep-deprived Bakura in tow, Takuya headed straight for the Hokage's office. Getting the ninja registration sorted was easy, he just had to find Tsunade, and she'd get it done with a single word. Along the way, Bakura couldn't help but curiously observe her surroundings. Compared to the barren, windswept Hidden Sand Village, Hidden Leaf Village was thriving. The streets were bustling, full of people, restaurants, and shops, things you'd never see back in Hidden Sand Village. Compared to Hidden Leaf Village, Hidden Sand Village truly felt impoverished. There was also no choking sand blowing in her face. It's bustling, isn't it? Takuya asked, noting her gaze. It is. Bakura admitted, keeping her head down as she walked beside him. It's far livelier than Hidden Sand Village, more people, more stores and restaurants. But most importantly, the villagers look happy. It wasn't that Hidden Sand Village's residents were unhappy, but life in the desert meant struggling for basic necessities. There was no comparing their standard of living with Hidden Leaf Villages. Not even the well-off Hidden Clouds Village could compete in this regard. It was simply a matter of the environment. Hands behind his back, Takuya glanced toward another part of the village, smiling. The urban area over there is even more lively, with taller buildings. It's different from the center here, near the Hokage's office, where most buildings are wooden. We'll go exploring later. But first, let's get your registration done. Chapter 419, A Defeated Nation Still Wants to Bargain? With no obstructions, Takuya walked straight into the Hokage's office, completely ignoring the Anbu guards posted at the entrance. Bakura hesitated for only a moment before following him in. The Anbu guards at the door made no move to stop them. They had been thoroughly chastised by their captain just the day before for overstepping their duties. Someone had decided to keep a close eye on Takuya and Bakura right after they returned to the village, and Tsunade had blown her top about it. Everyone had a distinct sound to their steps, along with a unique chakra presence. More importantly, the person entering had just barged in without knocking. Tsunade, who had been slumped over her desk, looked up to see Takuya, with Bakura standing behind him. Raising her eyebrows, she said, "Not bad, kid. You disappeared without a word. If it wasn't for the Anbu reporting to me, I wouldn't have even known you'd returned. Do you realize the penalty for abandoning your post, boy? Is this an interrogation?" Bakura blinked in confusion. "Didn't you say everything was fine? All right, cut it out. I know you're exhausted, but don't take it out on me," Takuya said as he dropped heavily onto the couch, pointing over at Bakura. "Can you help her get registered? Without ninja identification, moving around is difficult." Fine. It'll be done in no time. What's with you, kid? You head to the battlefield and bring back a pretty Kunoichi as a prisoner? What's your plan? Dominate the world? How are things at the front?" Tsunade asked. "Same as usual. After capturing Raza, Hidden Sand Village didn't dare fight back. We're just waiting for our esteemed Hokage to handle negotiations. As for the outcome, who knows?" Takuya didn't have much faith in the upcoming talks. He wouldn't have been surprised if, a few days from now, Tsunade ended up shocked by the report. He remembered that during the Third Shinobi World War in the original storyline, Hidden Sand Village, after their defeat, had put forward some rather unusual demands. The Third Hokage had agreed to them in an effort to buy peace and gain a stable ally. In the end, all Hidden Leaf Village got was an unreliable ally, and even the war reparations were waived. Frankly, Takuya never really understood the Third Hokage's logic. Giving up so much for an uncertain alliance, it made no sense. "You don't think this negotiation will go well?" Tsunade said, instantly picking up on the undertones in his words. "I didn't say that. Not my problem if this goes wrong. Who knew, maybe the Third Hokage would suddenly decide to wring Hidden Sand Village dry. Until the final result was in, anything could happen. He couldn't fully rely on the original story. Doing that risked getting smacked in the face by reality." Takuya straightened up, leaning on one arm as he shared his thoughts. "I'm just wondering, if Hidden Sand Village is truly looking for peace, they won't resist as long as our terms aren't excessive. But do you think they might use the negotiations to make some demands of their own?" "Demands? They dare to make demands? Are you joking?" Tsunade nearly threw the scroll she was holding at Takuya's head. Hidden Sand Village's request for a peace negotiation was essentially their admission of defeat. They were in no position to bargain. What gave them the audacity to think they could? I said if, Takuya retorted, rolling his eyes at Tsunoda's overreaction. Forget it. I won't say anything else. Get someone to take her for registration, he said, gesturing at Pakura. If she has to go through the usual channels, who knows how long it'll take. No doubt, everywhere had its share of bureaucracy. If Takuya really took Pakura to wait in line, there was no telling when she'd actually receive her identification. There'd be plenty of frustrating checks and endless questions. But with Tsunoda, Takuya was sure she'd have the ID ready in under half an hour, no queuing, no interrogation. Got it, Tsunoda said with a sigh, her eyes narrowing slightly as she studied Pakura. Finally, she said, you're his responsibility. I hope you genuinely intend to join Hidden Leaf Village and don't have any ulterior motives. If anything goes wrong, this kid will have a lot to answer for. Rest assured, Lady Tsunoda. Having severed ties with Hidden Sand Village, I'm committed to Hidden Leaf Village. I, Pakura, will not harbor any ill will against the village, Pakura said, bowing slightly. See that you don't forget it. Tsunoda nodded before calling out toward the door. Take her down to get registered. If anyone has questions, tell them to come to me. I want that ID on my desk in an hour. Understood, Lady Tsunoda. An ANBU member said, stepping inside to gesture for Pakura to follow. Once the non-essential personnel had left, Tsunoda tossed the scroll in her hand aside. Under Takuya's bewildered stare, she pulled out a bottle of sake from beneath the desk, uncorked it, and took a long swig, letting out a satisfied sigh as she relaxed back into her chair. Unbelievable. She was really doing this, drinking while on duty. Either Tsunoda had nerves of steel, or she'd moved from being a casual drinker to some kind of alcohol deity. What are you staring at? She snapped, noticing Takuya's incredulous look. Blushing slightly, she barked, I've been working my fingers to the bone here. I deserve a drink to unwind. Takuya's face twitched slightly. A drink isn't a problem, everyone needs to blow off steam. But are you sure you won't get too tipsy to handle the paperwork? The third Hokage smoked when stressed, and Tsunoda drank, no big deal. Takuya himself took long soaks in hot springs whenever he needed to clear his mind. Everyone had their own way of coping. But drinking during work hours? He just hoped she wouldn't accidentally get drunk and start making decisions while seeing double. I won't let it interfere with my work, Tsunoda said dismissively, taking 2 more gulps before reluctantly setting the bottle down. She knew how to relax, but she also knew her limits. There was a line she wouldn't cross. She let out a contented burp, her spirits visibly lifting. The saying was true, a good drink really could lift your mood. The fatigue that had been visible on her face was now replaced by a more vibrant energy. I knew I wasn't wrong about you, Tsunoda said, leaning forward with a smile. You didn't let me down. Hidden Sand Village is going to pay dearly for this. No matter how those old men try to negotiate. Let's see if Orochimaru has the guts to keep vying for the 4th Hokage title against me now, she added with a huff. If that's the case, Orochimaru might just want to crawl into a hole somewhere and disappear. Takuya stretched out on the couch, grinning. Hidden Sand Village definitely took a blow. The 3rd Kazekage is dead, Pakura switched sides, Sasori defected, leaving only Raza. They won't be able to stir up much trouble for a while. And from what Pakura mentioned, the 3rd Kazekage agreed to some tough demands from the daimyo of the Land of Wind. They're in for a rough time. Everyone knew what the Wind daimyo was like. After losing the war, Hidden Sand Village wasn't going to have it easy. Poor Raza, he wasn't even officially the 4th Kazekage yet, but he was already stuck paying debts by digging through the desert for rare resources. And that's assuming we don't bleed them dry further, Takuya said with a smirk. Pa, that bunch of bureaucrats in the daimyo's court, what good are they? Tsunoda scoffed. Even though she herself was related to the fire daimyo, Tsunoda had always despised the behavior of those pompous officials. Chapter 420, Let my student Kakashi see the harshness of society. The Fire Nation is relatively stable, the daimyo can't make too much trouble there. But the Land of Wind is a different story. It's like a massive weight pressing down on Hidden Sand Village. By the way, what do you plan to do with Pakura? Tsunoda asked, giving Takuya a look that clearly meant, you know what I mean. Takuya rolled his eyes and replied, come on, don't look at me like that. If I really wanted her, wouldn't I have just asked you for help? Are you saying your figure and beauty are inferior to hers? Though, you're a bit older. At least you have good taste, kid. Tsunoda agreed, but something felt off. Her smile turned into a glare. What did you say, brat? Are you calling me old? There it was, age, the one thing you should never bring up around a woman. Without hesitation, Takuya bolted for the door. Once Pakura's registration is complete, send her to the hot pot restaurant to find me. If you plan to keep her as a bodyguard, just make it official. I'm off, he said as he dashed away. Why waste time arguing with Tsunoda when he could be enjoying hot pot, relaxing in the hot springs, or paying a visit to his future student, Kakashi? Man, what a hassle. Thinking about the straight-laced Kakashi, Takuya scratched his head. I just hope I don't end up leading this kid astray. That brat. Tsunoda muttered angrily as she slammed the window shut. Half an hour later, Bakura returned to the Hokage's office, with her ninja ID successfully in hand. By this point, Tsunoda had already immersed herself in her work again. Takuya brought you here. His intention is for you to stay and become my bodyguard, but I don't quite trust you yet. In the meantime, you can follow him around. He wants you to meet him at the hot pot restaurant, and I'll have Anbu escort you there. Tsunoda explained. In the original story, Tsunoda's assistant and bodyguard was Shizune, Tao-dan's niece. Though Shizune had the strength of a jonin, her power was quite average. If Bakura could be trained, she would make a decent assistant and bodyguard for Tsunoda. But for now, Tsunoda couldn't fully trust her. Bakura was still too new, she needed time to prove herself. Tsunoda wasn't the type to play games or engage in deceit, so she laid everything out openly. Understood. I will do my best. Bakura said, bowing gratefully. Tsunoda's straightforwardness about not trusting her didn't bother Bakura. After all, switching villages midway and instantly gaining trust wasn't realistic, it was normal to face some trials. In fact, Tsunoda's direct approach made Bakura feel more at ease. A facade of false trust with secret surveillance and investigations would have hurt far more. Led by an Anbu operative, Bakura made her way to the hot pot restaurant. Sit down and eat. Afterward, we'll get you some new clothes and have a walk around the village so you can get familiar with things. Do you want off-the-rack clothes, or do you want something custom-made? Takuya asked. Just regular ones will do. Bakura replied. She wore a backless outfit, not because she enjoyed exposing her back, but because of Hidden Sand Village and the Land of Wind's harsh environment. It was simply more comfortable in the heat. Now that she was in Hidden Leaf Village, her outfit seemed out of place. Starting anew, Bakura decided it would be best to change her style. Alright. Takuya nodded. He didn't care what Bakura wanted to wear. How someone dressed was their own business, he didn't need to interfere. For Bakura, who was eating hot pot for the first time, the experience was a thrill. Takuya could see she had let her guard down. She was starting to see herself as part of Hidden Leaf Village, leaving behind her past identity and the baggage that came with it. After finishing their meal, the two wandered the streets of Hidden Leaf Village, with Bakura buying a few sets of loose-fitting clothes. As for combat outfits, Takuya finally understood why Bakura preferred her backless style. Regular clothes were simply too tight. It seemed like Tsunoda's wardrobe didn't have many options, but each piece she owned was custom-made for her. The woes of having a larger bust, apparently. With their shopping done, Takuya took Bakura for a walk around the nearby areas to familiarize her with her surroundings, eventually leading them to the entrance of the Ninja Academy. Another boring day. Kakashi walked out of the Ninja Academy, his hands resting on the back of his head, his eyes gazing lazily at the sky. Since his father, Kakashi Hatake, hadn't committed suicide, Kakashi had no reason to be emotionally scarred. Though he already had the skill to graduate, he obediently stayed in the academy. Tsukumo would never allow Kakashi to graduate prematurely just to take on missions. It wouldn't benefit his development. Tsukumo was cautious. One wrong move, and this kid with his dead fish eyes could grow up with a warped sense of things. Is this guy just bored of being too strong? Seeing Kakashi looking up at the sky, ignoring everyone around him, Takuya couldn't help but laugh. Kakashi had always been a loner. He didn't really care to interact with others. Go teach him a lesson, make him understand how cruel the world can be. Takuya said, giving Bakura a task. What do you mean? Bakura looked at him, confused. Leaning against a tree trunk, Takuya explained with a grin, because of the war, I asked Tsukumo-senpai to help split the workload. So, in return, he asked me to take Kakashi as my student. This kid's a genius, but his personality's a bit odd. He needs to experience setbacks. Just don't hurt him too much. Kakashi Hatake-senpai? Bakura hesitated, looking at the boy with the white hair and quickly piecing it together. She blurted out Tsukumo's name but then caught herself, realizing she had been impolite. Since she would be a Hidden Leaf Village ninja now, she added senpai to show respect. Takuya nodded, signaling for Bakura to go ahead. Kakashi, want to come to the hot pot restaurant with us? Rebellious Asuma, with a toothpick dangling from his mouth, walked beside Kakashi, acting tough. Not interested. Without even pausing to consider, Kakashi refused. It wasn't that he disliked hot pot, he actually enjoyed it a little, but he had no desire to hang around Asuma. If someone made a list of the kids Kakashi found most annoying in the academy, Obito Uchiha would undoubtedly be first, no question about it. And Asuma would come second. Ever since the slander against his father, Tsukumo, Kakashi had grown to dislike the third Hokage, and by extension, found Asuma irritating as well. Add to that Asuma's rebellious attitude, and the boy practically looked like a mini delinquent. If he weren't the Hokage's son, Asuma would probably get beaten up 8 times a day. Well then, how about we train together, Kakashi? I still don't really understand what Sensei taught us about throwing weapons. Rin said hopefully, glancing at Kakashi. No thanks, I'm heading home. Kakashi replied, uninterested in wasting his time with these kids who couldn't even grasp the basics. Darn it, Kakashi, you. Tease. Obito, ready to give Kakashi a piece of his mind, was interrupted as Kakashi gasped in pain. His head snapped back as though something had struck him in the forehead. Someone was attacking. The kids finally snapped out of their confusion. Holding his forehead, Kakashi scanned the area, trying to find his attacker. He had seen the stone coming at him, but it had been too fast for him to react in time, and now his forehead was throbbing. Standing at the entrance of the academy, Bakura tossed another stone up and down in her hand, looking amused. A beautiful woman none of them recognized. Where did she come from? Chapter 421, Kakashi first lesson was her? Obito, Uchiha and Asuma stared at Bakura, their expressions turning slightly strange. Who are you? Kakashi asked, his usual bored, skyward gazing eyes now filled with seriousness, completely ignoring the bump forming on his forehead. He swore he didn't know this Kunoichi, so why did she attack him? And in the middle of the academy grounds, no less. Bakura didn't answer. She simply tossed another stone. Move. Kakashi shouted. A second later, the stone smashed into where Kakashi had been standing, leaving a fist-sized dent in the ground. The rock itself shattered into pieces. The strength she had put behind that throw was evident. Gulp. The surrounding kids were terrified. If the stone could leave a dent like that, what would happen if it hit a person? Kakashi's forehead was proof enough, it was already swollen. Was his guard down because they were inside the academy? Or was it because he was surrounded by kids, and his vigilance had slipped? Takuya leaned against a tree, carefully observing everything. Bakura vanished the moment she threw the stone, and when Kakashi moved to avoid it, her fist was suddenly inches from his face. She's so fast. He couldn't react at all. With a thud, Kakashi was sent flying, Bakura's punch landing square on his face. Kakashi may have had the potential of a genius, but he wasn't fully grown yet. Against a seasoned elite like Bakura, he stood no chance. It was one-sided, nothing more than a beating. The sudden fight left many of the kids dumbstruck. Obito Uchiha froze for a few seconds, then shouted, "A ninja is hitting someone. A ninja is hitting someone." Though he didn't like Kakashi, he wasn't heartless enough to just stand by. He figured that shouting might bring the teachers out to help. Who are you? Do you know what kind of trouble you could get into for attacking a student here at the academy? Asuma spoke up, his father's status making him more knowledgeable about the rules than most. Bakura ignored him, delivering a swift kick towards Kakashi. Suddenly, the academy was abuzz. A pretty Kunoichi had came to the academy and was beating up Kakashi, one of their best students. How could this happen? With Obito leading the charge, the rest of the students started shouting too. Stop this right now. The commotion outside caught the teachers' attention, and several who hadn't yet left for the day rushed out from the main building. Before they could reach the field, kunai flew towards them, forcing them to halt. I'm sorry, but as Kakashi's new teacher, I feel he needs a bit of tough love. Lately, he's been slacking off, and I hope you all understand and don't interfere. Takuya said, stepping in front of the teachers. Yagami Takuya? Waimura Ikiki rubbed his eyes, looking Takuya up and down before exclaiming in delight, what are you doing back here? I heard you went to the front lines. Wait, are you saying you've taken Kakashi as your student? Yes, sensei. Senpai Tsukumo insisted, and I couldn't refuse. How have you been, sensei? Takuya asked politely. Takuya held a lot of respect for his former teacher, who had never treated him differently due to his unique background and had always been kind to him. Haha, you know, same old, teaching these kids, nothing much. Ikiki laughed, scratching his head as they chatted. The other teachers were left bewildered. Was this really the time for casual conversation? Shouldn't they be stopping that Kunoichi? Kakashi was already getting bruised all over. Wait, hold on. Ikiki finally said, frowning. Even if he's your student, you shouldn't use such violence to make a point. You should be nurturing him. Kakashi is still a kid, and as his teacher, you need to guide him properly. Ah, the lecture. Takuya sighed inwardly, recalling his days in school. It seemed like every teacher had this trait, endlessly lecturing their students. Bakura, that's enough. Takuya called out. The point had been made, there was no need to risk actually injuring Kakashi. Understood. Bakura stopped, looking down at Kakashi, who lay on the ground dazed, his eyes filled with confusion. Your skills are average, but your talent is promising. At least your reflexes are decent. Bakura commented. Even a genius who hadn't yet matured was nothing more than a target to an elite jonin like Bakura. Kakashi should consider himself lucky to have earned even that much praise. After all, she was no pushover. Even as he matured, whether Kakashi could eventually surpass Bakura remained a question. Despite Bakura's somewhat unclear fate in the original storyline, the real-life version of her was anything but weak. While some might break under such an experience, others like Kakashi would only grow stronger. He had remarkable resilience. In the original story, his emotional fragility was largely due to his father's suicide, compounded by the deaths of Rin Nohara and Obito Uchiha. Anyone else experiencing what Kakashi did might have lost their mind or gone down a dark path. But Kakashi pulled himself back from the brink. That strength of spirit was what made him different. A beating like this might crush other kids, but for Kakashi, Takeya wasn't worried. Master? Seeing Bakura now standing behind Takeya, Kakashi forgot all about his bruises, his mind completely blank. This female ninja was with Master? From today, call me Sensei, Takeya said, ruffling Kakashi's hair. It's been a while, Kakashi, and it looks like your guard's been dropping. Anyway, let's not dwell on that, go get checked at the hospital, then come find me at my place. From now on, whenever you're not at the academy, you'll be training with me. Turning to Akiki, Takeya added, I'll be heading off now, Akiki-sensei. After a polite farewell to Amora Akiki, Takeya walked away with Bakura. This kid, honestly. Akiki sighed, shaking his head. Alright, everyone, disperse. Head home if you're done here. Kakashi, get to the hospital. What kind of teaching method is this? Beating the kid up? Akiki couldn't wrap his head around Takeya's methods. If anyone tried that at the academy, there'd be parents banging on the door with complaints. Takeya Yagami was Kakashi's teacher? Obito Uchiha stood there, dumbfounded. The other kids weren't much different. What they thought was an act of random violence turned out to be training from Kakashi's sensei. Who would have thought? What kind of teacher just beats up his student like that? It was bizarre. Kakashi, are you okay? Your teacher's awful. We should. Asuma began, ready to stand up for Kakashi. But before he could finish, Kakashi cut him off. Sensei did it for my own good. Without another word, Kakashi turned and left the academy, heading straight for the hospital. He needed to heal up quickly so he could head to Takeya's place. He didn't understand why Takeya had suddenly decided to take him on, but he knew he couldn't afford to disappoint him. This was an opportunity he had to make the most of. Walking beside Takeya, Bakura kept glancing at his profile. She couldn't understand why Takeya had her beat up Kakashi. Didn't he worry it might negatively impact his student's development? Wouldn't it break the boy's spirit? Did I go too hard on him? She asked tentatively. Chapter 422, Hidden Leaf Village Elders. Is there anyone Yagami Takeya hasn't offended? Thinking back on Kakashi's swollen, bruised face, Bakura couldn't help but feel a bit of sympathy. But Takeya's orders were absolute, and she had no choice but to follow them. Takeya, meanwhile, seemed utterly unconcerned, carrying his newly purchased items as he strolled casually. He turned his head and said, for most kids, an experience like that would be damaging, maybe even make them question if their teacher dislikes them. But Kakashi is different. Don't underestimate him. If Kakashi were really that fragile, I wouldn't have taken him on, no matter how much Senpai Tsukumo pleaded. Taking on an apprentice was not something to be done lightly, even if it was part of a political deal. But Kakashi had the talent that warranted an exception. If it had been someone like Obito Uchiha or Asuma, no amount of pleading would have changed Takeya's mind. Why am I even worried when you're clearly not? Bakura shrugged, dropping the topic. As long as one had enough money, the medmen at the hospital were happy to make a quick buck, offering the fastest treatment available. By the time Kakashi arrived, his bruises had mostly healed, though it would still take a few more days to fully recover. Sensei. Kakashi greeted stiffly, standing ramrod straight in the living room, visibly nervous. No need to be so tense. Come have dinner first. Seeing Kakashi's obvious unease made Kushina laugh. She'd heard of Kakashi many times before, the young prodigy of Hidden Leaf Village, and she had to admit, she never thought she'd see the usually stoic boy acting so tense. Thanks, ma'am. Kakashi said, sitting down as Kushina nudged him towards the chair. He looked like the seat was burning him, fidgeting as though he wanted to stand back up. Only under Kushina's watchful eyes did he remain seated. Bakura seemed similarly out of place. When Takeya announced he was cooking, she had tried to help but had been promptly booted from the kitchen within 2 minutes. Dinner's ready. Takeya finally said, bringing the last dish to the table, amused to see Kakashi jump to his feet instantly. Relax, stay seated. I don't need any help, Takuya shook his head. Sometimes, too many people in the kitchen only made things more chaotic, not helpful. This one is for Lady Tsunade. Take it over later. Takuya said, pointing to a bento box. Got it. Kushina smiled, setting it aside before digging into her meal. The dinner ended in a slightly awkward atmosphere. Takuya regretted inviting Kakashi to his house for dinner. The boy's nervousness was contagious, spreading a strange unease among everyone present. After dinner, Bakuro took the initiative to brew some tea. I got it. Takuya said, gesturing for Kakashi to stay seated when the boy made to get up and help. Picking up the teapot, he poured tea for everyone and continued, You might be wondering why I suddenly changed my mind and decided to take you on as my student. That isn't something you need to worry about. What you need to do is train hard. I'll make time to guide you when I can. But don't get your hopes up about personalized training. I'm lazy, and I don't have that kind of time. Taking on an apprentice was a hassle, but Kakashi was different. He wasn't the kind of student who needed constant supervision. Teach him what needed to be taught, and he'd handle the rest himself. Yes, sensei. Kakashi sat up straight, attentively listening. He didn't even consider touching the teacup in front of him. I invited you here tonight to get you used to the place. From now on, whenever I'm in the village, you can come over after school. I'll help you train then. Understood. Kakashi's responses were almost robotic, a single word reply over and over. If there's nothing else, you can head home for today. Come back after school tomorrow. Kakashi needed time to digest everything, otherwise, he'd stay in this overly formal mode. Takuya didn't want their teacher-student relationship to be this stiff and awkward. Sensei, Kakashi took a step towards the door but then paused, turning back with a hesitant expression. This kid is restless. Takuya could read Kakashi's intentions just by looking at his eyes. He shook his head and said, No skipping classes. I know the academy lessons must be boring for you now, but even if you don't learn anything new, it's important for you to stay. Come over after school, or during breaks, as long as I'm in the village and have time. If Kakashi wanted to leave the academy and become a genin, all it would take was a simple request and approval. But neither Takuya nor Sakamo wanted that. Even if the academy wasn't teaching him anything, staying there was still important for Kakashi's growth. Graduating too early wouldn't benefit him. He was too young. The world outside the academy was harsh. Leaving the safety of that environment too soon could easily lead him down the wrong path. The original timeline showed how Kakashi's life had veered off course. Takuya never understood what the third Hokage had been thinking, first pushing Sakamo to his death, then letting Kakashi graduate early, and only trying to set him right again after he'd already gone astray by pairing him with Minato. Takuya would bet that without Minato's mentorship, without Obito's antics, without Rin's gentle care, Kakashi would have turned dark, completely. He's got the strength, that's for sure. His skills are definitely genin level, maybe even better than some average genin. Bakura said, sitting in the spot Kakashi had vacated and picking up her tea. In the Sand Village, a kid like him would receive the best education and care. What are you implying? Takuya put down his own teacup, smiling wryly. That Hidden Leaf Village doesn't nurture its geniuses? Or that our Jonin instructors aren't competent?